Returning to regular session, we'll now stand and the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we have Spanish translation available.
We have Vivian Rodriguez with us tonight. Vivian.
Sí, buenas noches y bienvenidos de parte de la Junta Directiva del Distrito Escolar de Santa Bárbara. Si hay alguien que necesita la ayuda de un intérprete, por favor levante la mano para darle un audífono. Gracias.
Thank you. And now there are headsets available for the hearing impaired, as you can see from our notice. And we'll move on to the announcement of closed session action. We do have one item to report from B2, number 2. It was moved by Cordero and seconded by Herron that the board ratify a settlement agreement dated January 22nd, 2009, and that passed unanimously. And now it's introductions, proclamations, presentations, or recognitions.
Well, good. We have a number of presentations tonight. I would like to start first by introducing to the group Dr. Alan Hilton. Alan Hilton is here this evening serving as the district's interim special education director. Alan is a retired SELPA director from San Luis Obispo. During his career, he served as a special education teacher, district and county office special education director, and SELPA director. Alan taught university-level special education courses and is publisher of a number of journal articles and 2 textbooks on special education and teaching training. He was a Fulbright Fellow in Special Education at Charles University in Prague. Generally, Alan is with us 4 days a week and will continue through the end of June. In March, he will be joined by Rick Nargi, who is a retired special education director. And our major presentation tonight is from our Avid students. We have with us, Avid, by the way, stands for Advancement Via Individual Determination. Did I get it right? All right. This evening we have Elise Simmons, Tracy Schifferns from McKinley School, and others with a number of students to talk about their Avid experiences. I'd like to thank Dr. Cynthia White in advance for arranging this presentation. And Elise, would you please come and introduce people?
So good evening. My name is Elise Simmons, and I'm a teacher and programs director at Santa Barbara Junior High, but I also work at the secondary level and at all the school sites for the Avid program. I have Tracy Schifferns, who's here, and she's the elementary representative for the Avid program. Before we introduce and have the students speak, I'd like to do a short presentation on just the Avid program. And would you like to have... Forward and back. Okay, thank you. Would you like to have copies of the PowerPoint? I did...
Yes, we will. We will take
paper copies.
We can put them in the board brief.
Okay.
When it goes out
So I'll
at the
get
end of the
that
week.
to you.
Good.
So as Dr. Sarvis began, AVID is an acronym for Advancement Via Individual Determination. And here in Santa Barbara, it is a 4th through 12th grade program. So I'm going to invite Tracy up so she can speak directly about the AVID elementary program.
And again, I'm Tracy Schifferns. I'm a McKinley school teacher, but also the AVID liaison coordinator for the elementary schools. AVID, when it first came down to elementary, started just at 6th grade and then has made its way down to 4th. The premise is, if we really just zeroed in on the bottom point there, is that we want a district-wide system by which we're making our students successful. We call it a program, and it is in such, but it's much more than that. It's really kind of the plate in which we serve it up on. What is AVID Elementary? Because elementary school is self-contained, it's really embedded throughout the day, so it's the practices that we do ongoing. primary aspect of Avid Elementary is that we're really teaching the kids to be organized and responsible. At the elementary level, the kids all have agendas. They are writing down their assignments on a nightly basis. They are organizing their work within a tabbed binder. So we're not only giving them skills and strategies, but also habit of mind. We're teaching the kids how to do school. It's not just here's the content of math, here's the content of science, but how do you do school? How do you be a student? And what are the skills that you need to do that? The distinction, I think, for Avid Elementary is that it's for all students because we are self-contained, and you're going to find that's a different component as Avid makes its way up to junior high and high school, that it becomes, in some cases, embedded in certain classes, but I think that they also have a elective component as well. And this is the Avid framework, and it's almost the framework of our whole day. Everything gets put in those agendas and in those binders. It's their management tool. We're getting them set for leaving a self-contained classroom where they've got the luxury of a desk to being able to transport themselves from classroom to classroom throughout the day. And that, for some students, is monumental. And without those organizational strategies and skills, we won't seeing them being as successful as they could be. Wicker is a term, and actually, it's actually become a verb in some cases when you wickerize things. And there's another slide that follows this, but it's basically strategies, both from a teacher perspective of how you deliver content, but then also how you expect students to show you their understanding. But writing, inquiry, collaboration, organization, and reading. Kind of want to drop down to the partnership component because we have liaisons at each of the elementary sites. We're working together 4 through 6 to make sure that we're consistently implementing Avid strategies. The fact that Avid Elementary now exists, we're looking at how do we extend this district-wide, that it's no longer just a junior high and high school component. The home piece, our agenda is our home piece. I mean, my kids could attest that if they had a behavior issue, that gets noted in their agenda, it goes home, it gets signed, it's where they record their assignments, it's where parents write back to us concerns, questions. That's our primary, other than telephone and email, but we're trying to have the kids that's their uniform piece of communication. And then, here we are trying to advance it to the community as well. And this just kind of gives you a better view of the wicker and what different components the writing, inquiry, and collaboration can take on. Huge part that we're transitioning to, because we're actually collecting data at the elementary level on organization in terms of how the kids fill out things in their agenda and also how they maintain a binder. The other piece that we're also going to be assessing is their ability to develop 2-column, 3-column, and Cornell notes. And when I say collecting data, that we're actually sending it to the bigger organization of Avid. And just so that you can see Avid by the numbers, total numbers, almost 2,000 students are impacted with 66 teachers that have been trained either in San Diego or primarily here by bringing up Avid trainers here to the district. But the breakdown by 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, so it's a substantial part of our elementary curriculum.
So the mission of Avid Secondary is pretty much the same as Avid Elementary, except for you can see that there starts to be a strong focus in terms of preparing for 4-year colleges. And you heard Tracy mention that Avid at the secondary level there is this thing called the Avid Elective class, which I'll explain in a minute. But there's also, as a district, and at the end I'll show you that many of the schools are going school-wide, which means every student is receiving a form of Avid. It may not be the exact Avid Elective, but they are receiving the strategies as well as the organization and the same message of you can achieve and you are going to go to college. So this is the mission of Avid. Again, you'll see that here's kind of just a generic what is Avid. You notice third bullet, a school-wide approach to curriculum and rigor. This is some data from Avid Center. It's all across the nation and as well as international. And it's also a strong professional development program. And I'll share in a moment the numbers of secondary teachers that have been trained in Avid. Here's the Avid Elective student profiles. So when we talk about the Avid Elective, we're talking about the students that you'll see here. They're Avid Elective students. Also, the teachers that have come tonight are also the Avid Elective teachers. So just for a moment, these are the students that we go through Avid. We recruit these students. They also volunteer. It is individual determination, which means they want to be there. And we want them to be there. But this is the criteria. And it's really for kids in the middle. And often Avid can be confused with a remediation program or transition program. And that's not what it is. It's to help students who just need that extra kind of boost. Those, again, as Tracy said it perfectly, they learn how to go to school and be students. And then so that when they go into their content classes, they can be successful and achieve at the level that they should be achieving at. This is, at the secondary level, we don't have the O, so we just have Wicker. So again, we have the writing. Here's some samples. And these are strategies that are done school-wide. They're not just done in the Avid Elective. They're done school-wide. And it has also become an adjective or even a verb at our levels. Have you wickered, your day? Have you wickered that activity? So the idea is, and I always push my teachers, is try to at least include 3 of these letters. Are the students writing? Are they inquiry, asking questions? Maybe there's a Socratic seminar that's happening, teaching the different levels of questions to students, pushing them to go to that next level, the higher level, the critical thinking level. Is there collaboration? You can walk into any Avid Elective class, and very rarely are they quietly sitting at their desks doing independent work. We spend at least 2 days a week working in tutorials where they're supporting each other and really collaborating on how to solve problems, answer questions. It's not about getting the answer, it's how well can we work together. Teaching them to work as teams. So students collaborating, and then of course reading. So teachers should be doing at least 3 of these different strategies, pushing themselves as they structure their lessons. And there's many more strategies. These are just a couple of them. And so here's some numbers. These are the number of Avid Elective students at each grade level. That's for this year. There's approximately at each junior high, there's at least 2 sections, 1 at each grade level, and the same is true at the high schools. Santa Barbara High has multiple sections at different grade levels. This is the number of Avid trained staff. We've gone to Summer Institute 3 different times, and you can see each time the numbers have grown. Sorry, mixed up there. And you can see again the numbers of administrators that have been trained as well as counselors at each Summer Institute. Summer Institute's a week-long training down in San Diego. The mornings are spent being trained in specific content areas, and the afternoons are spent working as site teams as a whole district. Avid also provides professional development in something that's called Right Path training, and that's more content specific. These are anywhere from 2-day to just 1-day trainings. We have so far 80 of our high school and junior high teachers have been trained in Right Path, as well as 2 administrators. And these are the different trainings that have already occurred. There is another set happening in March, which will probably get another 30 or so teachers trained in different types of content areas, like Socratic seminar will be one of them. Here's our senior data. This is the first year that we actually have true Avid seniors, and then we'll be sending off to Avid Center their data. At San Marcos, we have 25 seniors. They've already applied to 140 colleges, and actually the number for acceptances, I was just told by Mr. Donnell, who's the teacher, has actually gone up to 21 as of today. And this is early to hear acceptances. And so there's 21. At Dos Pueblos, 22 seniors. They've applied to 91 colleges. And as of the 13th, they've already been accepted to 20 colleges. And many of these students, I was looking at their specific data. We're talking about UCs, Cal States. I haven't seen any private colleges getting back to them quite yet, but a lot of UCs and Cal States. And, oh, it got kind of bumped. The stars should be in a box. This is, at last Summer Institute, each site team, we sat down, and the individual schools basically committed to 2 to 4 Avid strategies that as a school they're going to train each other on and use school-wide. Also, the outcome of this is we came up with a district-wide strategy that every school would commit to doing professional development on, and that's the Cornell Notes. So they got off kilter a bit, but you could see that each school has committed to a variety of activities throughout the school year in all the content areas. And that's it for the presentation. And I would like now to turn it over to the real reason why we're here, and that's for the students. Before I have them talk, because I know they're all now getting nervous, is I do want to just kind of acknowledge the teachers who came tonight to support the students as well as the administrators that are here. So if you are an Avid teacher or an administrator of an Avid school, will you please stand? Give them a round of applause. And so I'm actually going to have the elementary folks come up so he can skedaddle home soon. And then we'll turn it over to the seniors.
Hi, I'm Barbara Barr, and I'm the Avid liaison at Roosevelt Elementary School. I also teach 6th grade, and I think the most important thing that I can say about what I've seen for Avid is that the students, 6th graders, when they go to junior high, they will not be overwhelmed by the organization. They're going to be overwhelmed by the amount of classwork, by the building, how big it is, by how many students there are. But they're going to be ready to be students. My students all have binders. They have tab dividers that are written on, this is math, this is reading, this is spelling, whatever it is. I can say, okay, pull out your paper from 3 days ago when we talked about nutrition. They open their binder and they pull it out. Of course, there's a couple that go, where did I put that? But there's only a couple now instead of half of them wondering, oh, what folder is that in? What pocket is it in? So I'm very happy about what I see, an improvement. Every year it just gets better and better for what they're going to be ready for junior high. So I thought hearing it from someone who's actually in my class would be good. So I'd like to introduce Christian Peterson.
Hi. I'm Christian Peterson. I'm a 6th grader at Roosevelt School in Miss Barr's class. And I'm here to talk about why I think the Avid program is effective. Writing my assignments down in the agenda and keeping everything in one binder has helped me become organized and less stressed. The agenda helps me know what to do and when to turn it in so I can plan and stay on top of my assignments. The binder helps me keep track of all my work and also keeps the dog from eating it. The skills I'm learning from the Avid program will help me now and throughout my educational career. Thank you.
I'm going to pass the microphone.
Hi everybody, my name is Maria Lopez and I go to Dos Pueblos High School and I'm in 10th grade. My teacher came up to me and asked me if I could come speak to you guys about what Avid was not only to myself but to my classmates and what it has done not only for myself but everybody in this program. And get a little nervous sometimes, but I can do this. For me, I always grew up with the saying, you can do it, like, don't ever give up. You know, my parents are very old-fashioned, and college was not something that was given to you, but an opportunity. Something that was not available to everybody, but you had to work very hard to get there. If you wanted to do something, you had to reach the requirements, and reach the requirements for not only people around you, your peers, but the community as well. And if it wasn't for Avid, really, I would not be here right now. I'd probably be going not even to school, as much as you guys all hear, Avid is about helping you get into college and stuff, but it's also, for myself, it has helped me mature very much and grow as a person, and my intelligence has built more as I go from not only the requirements, but I like to reach to where I want to go. And because of Avid, I already know what college I want to go to. I already know what colleges I'm going to apply to, and I know what I want for my future, and some seniors don't even know what they want yet. And so, one of my goals is to be a pediatric nurse practitioner one day, and I want somebody to wake up in the morning and be like, she saved my life. I want somebody to know that I worked very hard to get to where I'm at. And it's a very big honor to be here today and to speak to all of you and let you guys all know what Avid has not only done to myself, but I'm sure all the kids here. And I just, I like for you guys to just, give it a shot. For my community, I have over 600 hours of community service in the past 2 years. And, I want to keep going. I want to strive for the best that I can do. I want to exceed my ability of what my parents expect of myself. And I would like to go to Pepperdine University, and I'm going to be the first person in my family to go to university. So, it brings my mom to tears. I love it. And not in a bad way, but in a really good way, because I like that. I like to know that they're very supportive, and they've never been so supported in something. My dad was like, you better go to that. And I was like, okay, yes. So, and I love the fact that I have the support of, all of you guys here, even though it's my first time seeing you guys. But, you guys are supporting us. You guys are rooting us on to exceed, to reach our goals and to reach for what we want to do. And, just never give up. That's what my parents always told me, never give up. And if you want that, it's right. It can be in your hands one day. If you want that, that's what you have to do. That's what you have to do to get to what you want in your future. And what you want in your future is very bright, they would always tell me. So I'm very honored to be here, not only for myself, but my classmates. I'd like to thank all of you for supporting the Avid program and for letting us have the opportunity that nobody else has. Thank you. Well, first of all, good evening to everyone. And I'm Maite Lopez, and I'm a senior at San Marcos High School. And I wanted to start off by saying that I can hardly believe that I'm standing before you guys today, because 3 years ago, my accomplishments were a bad truancy record, D's and F's on my report card. And thankfully, I was able to get into Avid once again, because I was a part of it before, and I chose to drop it. I guess we learn from our mistakes, and I truly did learn from my mistakes. And I got back into Avid, and Avid provided me with the hardworking skills. It provided me with confidence and preparedness for college, and it truly proved to me that I have a chance to go to any college I choose to. And so I've applied to many, including Berkeley University, San Jose State, Cal Poly, and many more. And hopefully I'll get into some of them. But yeah, Avid has really changed things. It truly has changed my grades, definitely. And I'm excited to be here in front of you guys. Truly, this Avid is what has brought me here today to present in front of you guys. And I'm really proud of that. And I'm sure a lot of other people feel that way too. Thank you.
we're going to kind of go around this way. So we're going to go up to the junior highs now.
My name is Elizabeth Sanabria. I'm in 8th grade. I go to Santa Barbara Junior High. I've been in Avid since 7th grade. I don't know what college I want to go to yet, but I know Avid will get me to a good one. Avid has made me a better student because it's kept me on task with my grades. It's like it helps you a lot with your grades. It can help students from with really bad grades get straight A's, and yeah.
Hi, my name is Marina Ceja. I am the 8th grade and I go to Santa Barbara Junior High. I've been in Avid since 7th grade, and Avid has helped me be more confident in myself and know that I can do better in school by getting straight A's and going to go get help with my teachers, knowing that it has helped me be more confident in myself by going to ask for help to my teachers, and after going to high school, I want to go to Channel Islands. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brisali Balderas. I'm in 8th grade at Santa Barbara Junior High. Avid has made me a better person by helping me keep my grades on track and giving me the confidence to go up to my teachers and asking them for help. Also, I want to go to Berkeley University, and that is my dream. My mom is very proud of me for getting into Avid, and if I weren't in Avid, I don't know where else would I be. Thank you.
Hi, my name is David Angel, and I go to Santa Barbara Junior High, and I've been in Avid since 7th grade, and Avid really inspired me to inspired me to do better in school, and it has helped me stay out of trouble, helped me to be less shy around my peers, and has helped me keep my good grades. And I want to go to UCSB because I get homesick really easy. So, yeah. And I'm glad I'm in Avid because it helped me learn a lot, learn from my mistakes, and just be a better person. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Brian. I go to Santa Barbara Junior High. I'm in 8th grade. Avid has made me a better person by keeping me out of trouble and by keeping me on track with my classes. I want to go to USC, and we went on a field trip to UCLA, and we learned a lot there. It was fun. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rudy Corrales. I am in 8th grade. I am attending Santa Barbara Junior High. This is my 2nd year in Avid. I am planning to go to either USC or UCLA or Cal Berkeley. Avid has made me a better student by actually me caring about my grades and getting my work done on time. And I learned how to take better C notes and become a better student. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Ivan. I'm a senior at San Marcos High School. I've been in Avid for 3 years now. Started in 8th grade at Santa Barbara Junior High, but then I stopped at 9th grade because I didn't know there was Avid in high school. But then once I knew, I went back on it. Avid's a really great program that has helped me get ready for college and really got me thinking about what things I need to get ready and how I have to do it academically, and just get me organized so that I can be successful and get into a school that I want. recently I've applied to 5 colleges, and I've been accepted to 2 so far, and I hope to get into UCLA, which is my dream school, and that's it. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm an 8th grader at La Colina, and I've been an Avid since I was in 7th grade. And I was really interested in Avid and all its potential that it had. And thanks to my 6th grader, the 6th grade teacher, she knew that I already had a lot of potential, that I already had a strive to learn more and be successful and have a really happy life. And by doing that, I can get a better education, also fulfill my craving for more knowledge, and also promise me with a better life. And Avid has helped me through college, with college planning. By visiting college, it helps me to choose what's better for me and how I can financially support myself while I'm in college. Avid has really helped me by preparing me for tests and taking Cornell notes, and by really helping me will making me be more prepared for more organization. And so Avid is a really great program, and I really hope that all students who really want to be successful should join, and all their teachers should acknowledge Avid as one of those programs that really could promise people better lives than what they have right now. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Arely Barreto. I'm a senior at Santa Barbara High School. I'm also an Avid student. I've been in Avid for 3 years now. Avid, it's just amazing. At first, I thought, oh, this is not going to help me. But now that I'm a senior and my last days or months at high school, I've seen how much it has helped me. At first, I hated taking Cornell notes. But now that I think about it and see how much it has done for me, like right now, I'm used to taking Cornell notes. I like taking Cornell notes because it has helped me on my tests, preparing for anything, learning. It's just an amazing way to succeed in anything. And it's really hard for me to believe that I'm actually going the right way, because at first I thought, oh, I'm not gonna make it. This is way too hard. My parents are a low-income family, are Mexican. None of them went to elementary school even. So how am I gonna do it? This is impossible. But now I see, like, Avid is a light in my dark night. And thank you. Thank you.
Well, that's tough to follow. I'm Tyler. I go to Santa Barbara High School. I'm a senior there. This would be my 3rd year in Avid. And I'd have to say though that like the skills I've learned in this class over the past few years, compared to how bad of a student I was freshman year, just like cannot compare. Just the structure of what it takes to be a good student. I've just like learned a vast amount of information on like what it takes to be that, and I don't think I'd be where I am without taking this class. All right, thank you.
Hi, I'm Valeria, and I'm a sophomore at Santa Barbara High School. Avid has helped me so much, especially taking, Cornell notes. You have no idea how much it's helped me in English. It also has helped me so much with time management. I definitely don't think I'd be where I am, being an ASB, Future Leaders of America, mock trial. I definitely would not be in these programs if it wasn't for Avid, because Avid taught me how to, it made me push myself so much more. It gave me that extra shove that I needed, and it totally raised my GPA. It's such an amazing program, and every student who's taking it is probably going to say the same thing. So thank you so much.
So that's our presentation. I don't know if there's time for questions. It's up to you.
Well, because we're really going to just listen to you at this point, I don't think we'll take many questions, but I want to thank parents that are here and parents that are not here, and teachers and administrators for all the support that you're giving to the students. And students, those were some terrific testimonials. And you can see yourself give them on Saturday on Channel 18 at 5 o'clock, if you'd care to watch it. But thank you. It's just terrific to hear how the program is going, and I'm just really looking forward to seeing the data as the time progresses with it.
Well, thank you for having us.
All right. Thank you. We will move on now to public comments. Any public comments? No. And then we'll go to C7, acceptance of donations.
Move to approve with appreciation.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? It passes unanimously. And now it's time for the superintendent's report.
I'll have a very brief report tonight. Board member Susan Deacon is not with us tonight. She's at a long-planned family reunion in Canada. At board, our Surplus Facilities Citizen Committee has been meeting to consider the feasibility of moving district office to Santa Barbara Junior High and renting out these facilities and Parma facilities. There's no recommendation yet, but we anticipate one soon. Most of our board members attended a training on the Brown Act that was presented by Fagan, Friedman, and Fulfrost just recently. And we recently met with our district wellness committee on drafting language to upgrade foods sold in vending machines. Campus vending machines currently do meet the state standards, but we would like to go the next step and provide healthier food. Our office regularly issues a report to the board called the Board Brief. This is a collection of reports and articles on school and district matters. A copy of the January 16 Board Brief is on display in the reception area or in my office. And upcoming events, the District Honor Band will be on February 25th, Dos Pueblos High School Jazz Festival, March 7th, the District String Festival, March 9th, and board members, you have a flyer, and there's one on the side table. It's a flyer on Theater Fest 2009, our high school district spring performances. Copies are at the desk and at the side table. Okay, you do have it. And that ends the superintendent's report. And Mimi, you're taking Cornell notes tonight, is that right? Good.
Thank you. We'll move on to the consent agenda. We are pulling item D20, the approval of contract award to LAC Construction for portable classroom relocation at Washington, for a later agenda. Are there any other items to be pulled? Yes, Dr. Noel? D3 and D8. Is there a motion?
I don't want to pull D5. But I do want to make a comment. This is one where we're increasing the capability to get to the internet and the just the whole broadband, a much better bandwidth, and it goes up to 100, 150 megabytes. And it's a tiny step, but it's a big step that I'm very appreciative of the staff for negotiating with Cox to get more for less, which I think is fantastic.
Cox has been quite a partner. The bandwidth goes up, the cost goes down. Great.
All right, I believe we have public comment on one of the items, and normally we take consent public comment during the public comment section, but if you want to speak briefly on this, we'll go ahead and do this. And it's for item D18, is that correct? The
This is
approval?
Kirsten Zimmer Deschler, D18.
Good evening, Dr. Superintendent and members of the board. My name is Kirsten Zimmer Deschler, and I'm a member of the Circle of Trustees at Santa Barbara Charter School. And on your consent calendar today, we're very excited that you will be considering the approval of a contract with a company to begin our playground installation. It's something that we have been working on for a number of years, raising money, making difficult choices, and we are very excited. Just this week we got the playground equipment at our campus, and once you all do your business tonight, we are ready to get installation going, and we anticipate that the playground will be installed in late February. And we are also then thinking ahead. We're moving on to our next phase of our dream field, and it's our phase 2, and we're working towards that as well to put in some artificial turf and some other nice things for Santa Barbara Charter School. So I just wanted to thank you, and I wanted to thank Mr. Headtonk for all that he's done at facilities, for everything that he's helped to facilitate to get to this point tonight. So that's all. I just wanted to say thank you, and thanks for having my comment.
I know it's been a long process, and that's been like this big muddy field there for a really long time, so I was excited to see this on here finally, too.
We'll be over to have a look, won't we?
All right.
We would love to have you.
Great. So was there a motion?
I'll move to approve the remaining items on the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
It passes unanimously. Okay, and with that, we will move on to the action agenda. E1, approval of independent evaluation and analysis of special education. Dr. Sarvis.
Board, we have 3 proposals for special education evaluation. Following our last meeting, I went back to the DVD and worked to capture all of the comments made at the board meeting about the proposals and about what was needed. I went back to the 2 that had previously submitted proposals to us. I told them that I was sending them. In fact, you see the whole list here. That the board was quite interested in parental involvement and communication with parents, and wanted full opportunities for parents to participate in that process. That the evaluation was to be a complete evaluation of the program's effectiveness. You see a number of questions. Dr. Noel submitted a number of those questions. Some were stated here. That it was to assess whether our special education philosophy, programs, and procedures are consistent with our district mission and core beliefs. And I added some information so that they would give us web links to other studies and give us resumes on some of the people who would be conducting the evaluations. I also asked them to comment on their ability to get the evaluation going quickly so that they could come to us so that we could get going with the hiring process for the top administrative positions, or position, excuse me. We have in the 3 proposals a brand new proposal from FCMAT. They pulled the other 2 back. They consolidated them and put some work apparently into building this proposal in more a manner in which we were asking. I also contacted Lieu Barber and Associates. Lieu Barber sent us a proposal as well, and I went back to Total Education Solutions. Total Education Solutions submitted an addendum so that you have Part A and Part B to Total Education Solutions. You have had an opportunity to look at those proposals, and I'll let you ask questions or have your discussion about them.
All right. First of all, do we have public comment for this item?
Yes, we do.
Would the board like to hear public comment before we have further discussion? Okay.
Marshall Eichelberger, followed by Carolyn Renard, followed by Catherine Abaca.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the board, administrators, and staff. I've had the opportunity over the past several days to review the proposals Dr. Sarvis received from FICMAT, Lieu Barber Associates, and Total Education Solutions. I've also had the opportunity to read through the report that Barber and Associates produced for the Santa Monica Malibu school districts, which was very similar in scope and purpose to the needs of our district. Having seen Lieu Barber's final work product, I can say without reservation that it is top quality. The report is very thorough, and the information contained in that report is exactly what we're searching for here in Santa Barbara. Reading the report gave me a greater appreciation of the quality of work Lieu Barber and Associates does. I wish I'd had copies of some of the FICMAT and Total Education Solutions work so that I could have given them a fair comparison. It's clear to me that Lieu Barber earned his money. The Lieu Barber report from Santa Monica Malibu reflects real insight into the nature of the problems that district was facing. It is of particular value that Lieu Barber himself was the former CDE special ed director. He clearly enjoys the highest level of expertise among the consultants at hand. Additionally, Dr. Barber is a lifelong specialist, and his primary professional focus is program evaluation and improvement, unlike FICMAT, whose primary focus is fiscal. In their proposal, FICMAT mentions their management and fiscal consultants first, program specialists secondary. In fact, the FICMAT proposal leaves one consultant position to be determined. In hiring Lieu Barber and Associates, you get Lieu Barber himself. With FICMAT, the district enters into a contract with FICMAT representatives who then hire, subcontract if you will, consultants in particular areas of specialization. While a smaller organization, Lieu Barber's team is Lieu Barber's team. There's no mention of subcontractors. Lieu Barber came in as a special ed director for Sacramento Unified directly following the Rachel Holland case, a case that went all the way to the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Sacramento Unified was in turmoil, and Barber came in and turned around the chaos in the district. Evidently, when a district is in crisis, Barber knows what to do. His skills combine a modern-day knowledge base with a historical perspective. He understands where the system has come from.
25 seconds.
He continues his active involvement with Mount Diablo School District as a consultant, having been appointed 8 years ago as a federal court monitor following a class action lawsuit. Dr. Barber has completed over 200 special ed reviews for districts nationwide. It's his company, so you get firsthand contact with the expert. There are no quality assurance concerns because Barber stands to gain nothing more from his contract with this district. There's no commitment to continue to provide anything after the review is completed. He's been appointed by courts in some very controversial, difficult special ed situations. Courts see him as a viable entity to pull the pieces apart and find the issues. Among both school districts and courts, Barber is highly respected. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia.
Might have a hand.
Carolyn Renard, followed by Catherine Abaca, followed by Lane Wheeler.
I completely agree with Ms. Eichelberger's thoughtful analysis of why Lieu Barber would be the best person to do this investigation, basically. I also wanted to bring up another aspect of this. I've looked at all the proposals, and I don't think any of you were, maybe except for Mr. Noel, were on the board at the time when the former special ed director, Diana Rigby, was found to be the first special education administrator personally liable for the denial of special education rights to a student and damages. And at that time, the school board ordered a similar review and investigation of the special education department. It was a disaster. And that was, it turned out to be a farce, basically. And, I really don't want to see that happen again. Not only did the public was never allowed to know the results of that investigation or see the report, the board was never able to see the report. It's my understanding. And so the reason I'm bringing that up is that I think it's really imperative that as part of the agreement, that the people, once they all propose to gather a bunch of information and make inquiries and speak with parents, that information is put into the form of a report, and that is presented to the board and to the public. I mean, I think it's imperative that that be part of the agreement that you make with anyone. I mean, the taxpayers are paying for the gathering of this information, and it can't be kept secret from them. It just, and from you. You guys need to see that report, and so does the public. And even it could even be made into two parts, where first they present you with the report, and then after you guys, and after some discussion, then they come up with a plan on how to deal with things. You know, I really don't think it's proper for them to have the information, keep it to themselves, come up, analyze it, come up with some recommendations without the board being involved and even knowing what was found, much less having a chance to analyze it themselves and have some input into their recommendations. So I think that that's really important. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine Abarca, followed by Lane Wheeler.
Good evening. Nice to see you all. I just want to have a concern about the independent analysis and wanted to throw in my 2 cents. Perception for parents at this point is a very delicate thing. And we know we've had a lot of conversation about perception. And my concern with FCMAT is that we have someone who works for the district who used to work for FCMAT. I'm not saying that that is a problem. I'm just saying that perception from the parents might see that as it not being very independent. So I would like to kind of try to avoid that by going with someone who absolutely has nothing to gain from the school district and having a truly independent analysis. And I do agree with both Marcia and the previous speaker about all of their comments as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. Lane Wheeler.
Hi, Lane Wheeler, President of Santa Barbara Teachers Association. In looking through the 3 proposals, a piece that seems to be glaring to me is the fact that special ed teachers, psychologists, nurses, DIS professionals, staff support specialists, adaptive PE specialists, and general education teachers, the largest group of stakeholders that provide the service and the protocols and the proper educational support for students who need it, are minimalized in the scope of the proposals. It's an occasional teacher here and there to conduct a phone interview with. I don't see any place in any of the proposals to sit down with teachers on a one-on-one basis or an individual basis to really solicit what they've know about the system and how it works and what works and what doesn't work. These teachers have suffered through 7 special education directors in 8 years, and they should be at the center of providing the information that will help craft and support what happens with this survey of the special education department and how its administrative restructuring transforms and appears in 6 months from now. And I find it very lacking on the part either of the board that provided the direction for these proposals or on the fact that the people who are making the proposals don't seem to value the input of teachers. So I would ask you to add to that and really strengthen that section of it, regardless of whom you select. I know you'll make a good choice based on the proposals, which seem to be adequate, except for that glaring absence. So I would ask you please to consider including more staff input on the proposal and of whoever you choose. Thank you very much.
Is that it for public comment? Dr. Sarvis, did you want to add anything there before?
Well, just to the last one, I know that in the FCMAT report we have dissemination of surveys to all teachers and staff that provide data regarding staff morale, communication, effectiveness of programs, services, and support. That's all teachers and staff. We also have conducting focus groups for teachers and staff to provide additional input regarding special education and assist the development of strategies for systems of open communication, problem solving, accountability, and support. And I frankly thought that was a strength, but, well, let me just point that out.
And did you, I believe you have something from Mrs. Deacon to read to us, so why don't we go ahead and
Yes,
read
as
that?
I said, Mrs. Deacon could not be here. She did, however, take an early look at this item, and later that Friday, she sent me something that she hoped would be able to be read to the board as part of the board's discussion, and then she left town. So I was pleased that she took the time to do that. This is regarding approval of independent evaluation and analysis of special education, and it's dated January 23. Because I could not be at the January 27 board meeting, I wanted to briefly share my thoughts on this item. Each of the three proposals has merit and individual strengths. However, on balance, I'm leaning toward an endorsement of the FCMAT proposal for the following reasons. Bullets. The FCMAT investigators appear to not only have very qualified specialists, but breadth in numbers as well as depth of expertise on their teams. The Barber proposal relies heavily upon several individuals. The FCMAT proposal spells out in greatest detail how the review process involves staff and parents. An entire scope area is devoted to parent participation and communication, and the review calls for all special education parents to be surveyed. The FCMAT samples, the FCMAT proposal samples of previous studies are more current. It appears only 2 of the Barber studies have been conducted in the last 5 years. And finally, the total education solutions cost estimate is prohibitive. FCMAT and Barber are only about $8,000 apart, but it's possible we might get more bang for our buck with FCMAT. So I did have those comments from her.
All right, Dr. Noel.
I want to go back to Mr. Wheeler's comment because I'm a little puzzled by it also. Here in the Barber proposal on page 4, there's a paragraph about all related data will be reviewed, including financial data, the local plan minutes, et cetera, et cetera. District staff interviews will be conducted with district staff, including but not limited to the superintendent, assistant superintendents, physical office staff, human resources staff, curriculum, instruction and staff development personnel, special education administrative and program staff, teachers, site administrators, school psychologists, school nurses, related service personnel, instructional assistants, and others as appropriate.
Thank you. Any other comments that you, or questions or thoughts you'd like to share, Dr. Noel, at this time, or shall I move on?
Well, I have some views on this. I think that, first of all, I would concur that the Total Education Solutions proposal is not cost effective. Too expensive, and I don't see the strength of the program. I think it's not quite apples and oranges to compare FCMAT with Lieu Barber and Associates, but there's a little bit of non-comparability, and it mostly has to do with really some information that is both in the proposal and that report that we were all able to look at that stands outside of the proposal. And when I look at these, I do draw upon my impressions of the report to flesh out my opinions of the proposals. I'm particularly struck by the it's not kind of a it's not a check. None of these have a checklist mentality, but the Barber one, particularly the report, goes way beyond a checklist of the things you look for when you come into a district and do a review. And we've seen some of that. In fact, school services in the physical area simply has a program. Here's what they do, and they have to look at the physical health of a district. Item 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think none of these err in that extreme. But on the other side, the Barber proposal, particularly in light of that report that we could read, shows more likelihood that we will get a very insightful and in-depth study of our district, drawing upon the kind of professional experience he has. So I'm inclined, although it's a tough decision, I'm inclined toward the Lieu Barber and Associates proposal myself.
Mrs. Cordero?
Well, I'm I'm not sure that I'm inclined, well, let me take that back. I have been inclined more towards the FICMAT for many of the reasons that Mrs. Deacon pointed out, but not strongly. It's a very, I see both of them as having strengths, and I don't really see a lot of weaknesses in either one. I do want to point out, however, that there's very little mention, although there is some, of how to address or how to go about getting information from the non-English speaking community, particularly parents of our students. So I wanted to make sure that in whatever proposal we adopt or support, that we maybe give them a little bit more direction in terms of addressing that issue. I did think that just as a sort of starting point, which I don't want to preempt Mr. Herron's comments, but it's at least from what we've heard so far, I think we can eliminate the total education solution proposal and really bring it down to a choice between FICMAT and Barber. So if I kind of just want to put that out there, that maybe we can agree that that's what we're looking at.
Mr. Herron?
I would agree with that, not necessarily just on cost, but they, in their next to last paragraph, they say they've never undertaken this type of special evaluation and assessment. So on that sentence alone, I wouldn't want to try them out.
All right. Any more comments, Mr. Herron, between the remaining two?
Yeah, I'm same as Annette a little bit. The one thing I liked about FICMAT is they did respond to what Dr. Sarvis asked for, and that was websites of other reports. And I did pull them all off, and I did go through them, and if anybody else would like to look at them, they're more than happy to. It's a broad cross-section of reports. I can tell you it's not canned. It's not, as some of us thought maybe it might be, the same report, just put a different name on it. It's all very responsive, and they're all within the last 2 years. And the one thing about Lieu Barber that struck me is that he hasn't done a lot in the last few years. And so I couldn't, when I Googled him, and maybe some of you can help me, because maybe you did Google, I didn't find a great deal about his activities. No website for sure. And so I couldn't really research very much about him. But I was also very concerned about FICMAT, where they don't talk about individual teacher and individual parent investigation. And I think based upon what we've been through, the highest priority has to be interviewing individual parents in an environment where they can be open, not in a form, not in a survey, but one-on-one in some capacity. So that's the one glaring loophole I see on FICMAT.
Dr. Noel?
In fact, in that I wish it were in the proposals. In that Santa Monica Malibu report, a procedure is described how they gave parents and teachers the assurance that they could speak in confidence. And it was a fairly, I had never seen anything quite like it, because I always felt that is a dilemma in many aspects of education policy. But I think it involves almost like a signing of a confidentiality agreement. Do you recall, Ed?
That's what it is, yes.
So that there was really solid assurance that these people could speak candidly and openly. And I wish that were in the proposal. It's not, but I presume that we could ask to have that if we wanted to go with Barber and Associates.
Well, I have to say with Barber and Associates that it also says it will be focus groups with parents. It will be focus groups with parents. It doesn't say anything about any individual interviews, and so it really is equivalent to what FICMAT is proposing.
But you still need to provide security for the
Yes, and I'm sure
participants.
I'm sure that anybody, whichever firm we go with, would do that. Again, I noticed what Mrs. Deacon noticed, and it is, I think, quite relevant that FICMAT is clearly doing this a lot and doing it right now. One other thing that I noticed that was different between the two proposals, and that was the review of our relationship with the SELPA. And that is something that we've needed for a really long time. And I think if it's not done now, it's going to need to be done separately. And so that sways me a little bit more towards FCMAT, because I know how long we've wanted that information. But again, I agree with the rest of you that probably Total Education Solutions is not something that we need to address. They both look reasonably good. Any other comments? Maybe we would like our interim special ed director to chime in with any comments that he might have.
Dr. Hilton is knowledgeable about this, so he has gone over the proposals as well.
I'd like to compliment the board on the review that they've done. I can tell you spent some time on it. I actually have not dealt with Lieu Barber except on an extended basis, not in any studies that he's done. But I know him and I know he's credible. FCMAT I have dealt with in a couple of studies that they did for districts while I was a SELPA director, and their work quality and top notch. I think statewide at this point in time, FCMAT has a stronger reputation than Barber does. But I think they're, again, I'm going to couch that by saying they're both credible organizations. That's pretty much the input I have for you. We were pleased in San Luis Obispo County with the work FCMAT did.
Mr. Herron.
On page 4 of Lieu Barber, he does say, right underneath the work plan, members of the district staff and parents of students with disabilities will be interviewed, and relevant questions will be asked and reviewed with regard to the 12 areas of investigation. So Lieu Barber does talk about interviewing parents. Doesn't say how many, but if you look at the Malibu report, he interviews, I think he said he interviewed 12, I believe it was.
And there's a lot of days devoted for it, too, on that work on page 7.
I would like to also, I was going to comment on the SELPA, and I think FCMAT is heads and shoulders above Lieu Barber on the SELPA situation. And I think that is, in a lot of the discussions going on in this room and outside this room, the SELPA relationship is huge. And so learning more about that from a financial aspect, which is FCMAT's specialty, would be a huge benefit also.
Any other comments? Is anybody willing to make a motion?
Well, as I said, my initial sense was very much along the same concerns and characteristics that Mrs. Deacon pointed out. I've been persuaded by our discussion that I think that is appropriate, although I certainly have no real reservations about the Barber proposal. But I would like to make the motion that we approve a agreement with FCMAT to undertake this review.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? It passes 4-0. All right. We will now move on to item.
Let me just note
Okay.
that I will go back to FCMAT and I will talk to them specifically about those two issues that I just heard from the board about direction in addressing non-English speakers and opportunities to interview individuals, individual parents and teachers with an assurance of confidentiality.
Yeah.
So I'll pursue that.
Madam President.
Dr. Noel.
I'm sorry, did you go? The next step in this is to, at some point, we're going to have a contract. And the terms of the contract are really the critical part. That's the charge. And I would hope that that can come to the board in time, really, maybe even as a conference. Well, we need we need to do this quickly, don't we?
So you don't want to approve this contract?
We just.
Well, I mean, we've
thought
already
that's what we
seen
just
some
did.
statements of people would like to make sure something is a little clearer, because whatever goes out as this contract is what we're stuck with. I would like a chance to,
Well,
maybe we can do it in writing.
Are you saying that you'd like some written clarifications of what Dr. Sarvis is proposing to go
Well, I
out?
thought we
Because
just decided to choose FICMED. I didn't realize that we were approving a contract.
Well,
that's what
And-
this
and-
is, yeah.
And the word, as I say, the wording of the contract is important. I would like to have to spell out some of the notions about confidentiality for parents and teachers, to be a little more extensive and clear about issues of, looking at issues of equity and access to special education services by low-income and minority students and families and so on. And I'd feel better if we could flesh that out a bit.
Mrs. Cordero?
Well, I think those were the two areas that Dr. Sarvis said he would work with them on, but it might suit our purposes if we just see that particular language, whatever is added in, not revisit the whole contract that we just voted on, but to just see how we address those two issues, and if we could just see that language, that might be helpful.
Would you like to see that in a board brief?
I'm willing to see it in a board brief.
Mr. Herron?
No, I want to see those added to the contract, period, because without them, I would withdraw my approval.
Well, time is of the essence. May I suggest that I go back to FICMAT? This is the fourth time now, and they've been very surprisingly, they've been very responsive, because they have a lot of other people calling for their time. And ask them to give us language on this, and if I review it with the board president, we could go ahead with the contract if it's acceptable.
Dr.
I'd like to get some clarification on the one-on-one or the interviews in the, also, I'd like to understand a little more about what they're going to look at for SELPA, because I know the issue that this board has been concerned with in the past has to do with the funding model. And I don't want to dance around that. I think we need to hear from them in this study.
Right, and that is specifically what they
Is
say
that
in the scope.
Is that explicit? I was looking
Yeah.
for that wording again.
Yeah.
Interviews with the local SELPA director, assistant superintendent. Where does it say what they're going to ask? Or what they're going to be looking for?
Well-
Evaluation of the current special ed facilities consortia.
Well,
It's not as focused as I would like to see.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Herron?
I think under Scope C, fiscal review, points 1, 2, 3, and 4 are quite extensive.
Mrs. Cordero?
I don't see the funding model.
One moment, Mrs. Cordero.
I think the area where it addresses the feasibility of the district becoming its own SELPA, to some extent addresses the funding model, because in order to have that discussion, we have to look at the model of the funding. But I also think that that a lot of the details, the very specific details, do not need to be spelled out in the contract. I think we can certainly work with, they've given us the fact here that they're willing to take a fairly extensive look at SELPA and our relationship with it. So I think since they're already recognizing that that's what they're going to do, that if we wanted to say, we specifically want you to ask this question, that seems like some direction we could give them once they start the process. But in light of the fact that we've already approved this contract, I don't necessarily want to go over the whole, all the language again. But I think it is possible for us to give them direction once they begin the process.
Could I hear the motion that we approved? I did not know I was voting on this wording of this contract. I thought we were voting, I thought I was voting on a choice of vendors.
It was the move to approve the proposal from FICMAT.
Yeah.
So,
That's still,
But I think that we can work with this, Dr. Noel. I really think that we can have them add the language to the contract and still move ahead. If you're willing to give us, if it's anything significantly out of line, we'll bring it back to a board meeting. But I think that I'm confident from what Dr. Cyrus has
Could it be an
said.
addendum we could add later and, subject, of course, to their having their approval?
I'm sure we could. And let me further say, we would love to have them give us their opinion on the SELPA funding model. I would be most happy
Yeah.
to add that.
I think it's utterly crucial, because when that debate comes, there will be a need to look at external, objective, expert evaluations.
Thank you, Dr. Noel. That's very true. All right. So with that direction, we'll move ahead and go on to E2. Approval of special education ombudsman position.
We have one public comment or one comment.
Why don't we have Mrs. Sawaski present on this, and then we'll take the public comment.
Okay. I believe we've spoken about this position briefly in our conversations about special education. This particular position, ombudsman, came from conversations particularly with parents and over time, several groups of parents. And this thought kept coming up and this idea, and it's taken from a model that many districts have. Sometimes it's called a liaison. We chose as a parent comment and some discussion about the name even, what it would mean as a resource for parents and someone they could come to. And so we're using it as a temporary position. We wanted to get it in place so that when we have our outside evaluation analysis going on, this type of position could be there to, to see if that would work in our district, if it's, something that would really fit a need. And so I was pleased to see how quickly our personnel department could get this together, and you see the attached position. We, of course, worked with CSEA on this. It is in the fact that they know it's a limited time position, so it doesn't need to be bargained at this point. And so we've put together the position description, and it's here for you to look at and ask questions on and hopefully approve so we can get it flown as soon as possible.
Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and, shall we take public comment first, Dr. Noel?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Okay.
Carolyn Renard.
When I first saw this proposal, I thought, well, it seems a little too good to be true considering what this district usually does. But then the more I examined it, the more I realized it's really just a joke. If you look at the salary, $15 an hour, and then you look at the education and experience required, any combination equivalent to graduation from high school and 2 years experience working with special education students or functions. So you're basically not requiring anything but a high school graduate or any combination equivalent to that and 2 years experience working with special ed students or functions. Yet this person is going to be, only a professional can perform the kinds of duties that are described in this job description, not someone working for $15 an hour, not someone with the equivalent of a high school education and 2 years experience. They're going to be interpreting the special education laws to parents, which are extremely complex, one of the most complex set of laws in this country. This is ridiculous. You really should have done better.
Thank you. Mrs. Cordero.
Well, I find myself in the surprising position of agreeing wholeheartedly with Ms. Renard. Not perhaps in those specific words, but I agree that the education and experience level, because, especially in light of the concerns that have been raised in recent months from parents, my concern focused primarily on would this person be in a position to help parents confront or maybe advocate for, with parents to an administrative level position in special ed. I'm worried that this position will be at a disadvantage in interfacing with the administrative department for special ed. And so that was a big concern for me, and I imagined that the salary scale was commensurate with what the education and experience level would be. Although I personally think that the job duties require a bit more than what we've identified as the education and experience level. But in addition to that, and sort of on a separate item, I'm concerned that in the area of special education, that we seem to be making some physical demands that I question. Dexterity of hands and fingers to operate a computer keyboard, I know that there are many ways to accommodate individuals with disabilities who need to use a keyboard. And so I'm wondering if that's a reasonable requirement to place on someone in this position. I don't know the others, if they are, if they could be reasonably accommodated without that, without those physical abilities or not. But it seems to me that this is an area where we should be particularly sensitive to not limiting people's access based on ability level. So those are my concerns.
Dr. Noel?
Yes, my first thing was when I saw $15 an hour was kind of like, what? And I hadn't read the qualifications yet. Okay, but $15 an hour, that's not very realistic. The qualifications, if you read the qualifications, it sounds to me like $50 to $75 an hour, and then you might be hard put to get someone because I mean all the points have been made about understanding special education law and being able to interpret things to parents and so on. Well, I would not qualify for the job, and I've been trying to learn this stuff now for quite a few years. Okay, I have searched in vain for knowledge of Spanish, and I'm particularly concerned because I talk with Joan Esposito and Carolyn Renard at the Dyslexia Awareness Center, and I'm aware of the clientele base that they serve, and these people are so underserved, and we've got that in our charge to the outside reviewers, that we can do everything we want, but if we don't make it possible for parents to communicate, even at their level of understanding or lack of understanding of these complexities, but just to communicate, I think then we're just missing the point entirely. I think that's very important. More, and someone alluded, I think it was perhaps you, Mrs. Cordero, the person has to be qualified and have credibility, and a crucial element of that credibility is, can this person stand up to Mr. Hilton? And I don't mean to personalize this, Dr. Hilton, to the director, to the permanent director, and say, I've just heard from some parents, and I've made a judgment, and I don't think the district is on solid grounds here. It's standing up to them, but then it's having the parents and families believe that he or she stood up to the district and was able to really advocate for the conclusions that he reached or she reached. It's just that maybe advocate's the wrong word to use in there, but to at least speak. And the ombudsman position is a very interesting institution. One of my colleagues in political science, that was his primary area of specialization, was the institution of the ombudsman. It's a tough one to develop, and it's a tough one to make work because of these tensions that it has to walk between. Thank you.
Mr. Herring.
Maybe Dr. Sawatsky can tell us a little bit more about what the intent of the position was. As I was at the meeting of parents at McKinley, what I heard wasn't the type of person you two are talking about. It was somebody that parents could just talk to and maybe get guidance, which is totally different than a very strong advocate. So I don't know. Maybe you have some idea of who this person is, or what was the intent of this to begin with?
As far as like a person, I mean, you said, do we have an idea of who this person is? I mean, we don't have any person in, yeah, but it's much more like what you said. Our intent was more of just someone that parents could go to find out where to go. A person they could call and say, I need this information, where might I find it, who would I speak to? I hadn't pictured this person standing up to or going against, or, I mean, it wasn't particularly framed around that kind of role. Now, I'm understanding state and federal laws and relating to disabilities. There's a lot of technical, types of things. I didn't expect the description maybe doesn't fit as well as what we envision this person doing. Having knowledge, certainly, but having the ability to talk to the director or talk to someone to find out more about something, to answer questions, to really be more of a resource. We didn't want the position to be limited either, so that lots of our parents could potentially apply for this. And so that was one reason for the education and that kind of thing. I mean, and we got the direction as far as the salary just from our personnel department and what, fits in that category. It's not set in stone, obviously.
Maybe it's the title ombudsman that is.
That's not, yeah.
It's not reflective of what you were thinking.
Right, I know that.
Yes.
So.
And I'm wondering if it's something more like parent guardian special education resource specialist or something along those lines. Mrs. Cordero?
Well, I was going to make that comment too, that I do think the title ombudsman maybe misdirects what the intent of this was. But part of why I had the understanding I did is because it does say that part of the duties would be to resolve issues or concerns. Because I thought I was on the same page as what you just described as I was reading down to that point, because it did sound like just someone who was going to explain things to the parent. But then that statement, it says, to communicate with district personnel and various outside agencies to exchange information and resolve issues or concerns, then it sounded to me like there was more to it than just explaining things.
That's a good point. That probably resolve is not the right word. It's more answer questions, resolving issues in a way that, you can go here, you can get this, or not actually making determinations and making decisions based on special ed law or something.
Could I also
Thank you.
address, this was really born out of meetings with parents, where parents were saying it would be a big advantage if there was someone in the district, and not necessarily an administrator, who could help parents navigate this system, who understood it, could help them with the process, but it was not to be an advocate. It was not to come in and represent the parent during an IEP meeting. I mean, it was very much to offer additional assistance to parents, and it was rather a popular idea in our meetings with parents. And I'm a little concerned about the direction it's going here. I do agree if there's some sense in using the term ombudsman, that this would be some oppositional role or responsible for dispute resolution, then that's not the right term. But I am concerned, I mean, my tendency would be, given the concerns, to simply withdraw it and drop the idea. But I do think that the parents have told us that they think a role like this, perhaps given conditions that we eliminate resolving issues, perhaps with a contingency that we make sure that someone has resources so that they can speak with parents who are non-English speaking, perhaps with some of those conditions. So I would ask you to go either in one direction or the other. I mean, we could drop the idea altogether, or we could refine some of the elements to make it workable.
Mrs. Cordero and then Dr. Noel.
Well, especially if this was something that the parents were requesting, I don't want us to drop it. I do think we should change then the title of it, and I think we should eliminate or remove the resolve issues or concerns. And we may want to replace resolve with another verb, or I don't know if we want to eliminate it completely, but that I'm open to however you want to do that. I still think we might want to consider increasing the rate of pay. I don't necessarily think that, well, I don't, it depends on maybe what the special education budget can afford. I'm not sure I would necessarily say $50 or $60, but given what I now understand the position to be. But I do think even at the sort of assistance level, it probably requires a little bit more understanding and knowledge of the special education arena to warrant at least a slightly higher salary. But I certainly do not want to drop it. I would rather have us move forward with it.
Dr. Noel.
Yes, I concur with Mrs. Cordero on most of what she says. We certainly shouldn't drop it. The night of that meeting, I believe the term, at least my recollection is that the parents kept talking about a liaison, or perhaps it was your interpretation of what the parents were saying. I see it as like a system interface, something somehow to help people connect with the system and find their way through it. This is all part of the pay. Any combination equivalent to graduation from high school and 2 years experience working with special education students or functions, I just don't think that does it. It's hard to imagine it's hard to imagine this being someone who either hasn't got a bachelor's degree and some experience, or someone with an awful lot of experience that compensates for the lack of the degree. But I don't think this is high enough qualification, and that goes with the pay. This job description, I agree with Mrs. Bernard, this is very technical stuff. And we could be setting ourselves up for more trouble than we get from this. If someone gets in there and starts misleading parents, we'd be better off with no one. So I think this has to be done very, very judiciously and with a very high quality person. The job has to attract some really good people, and they have to be bilingual.
All right. We do have a couple more public comments. I'm going to close to public comments now, but I think we have some parents who would like to chime in.
Charlene Allen, followed by Jenny Kuhn.
Thank you for that acknowledgement of that raised hand. I truly appreciate that. I felt compelled to be able to contribute what this ombudsman position started out to be, because I was also at that meeting, and I do think it ended up, we discussed having a liaison. And I can give an example of a few parents in that you start to have a problem either with your IEP, with communication issues at campus, with your aide, and you're not sure who to go to. You've already tried to talk to your case manager or to the principal, and you're just still not sure what to do. And up until now, that call to the school district is the fearful one. It's like, once I call the school district and I get a special ed person on the phone, I have to mean business. I have to be able to take action. And a lot of parents aren't quite there yet. So they just sit and they wait, and their situation gets worse, and they get more stressed, and they get more upset, and they don't know where to go. So I was foreseeing this type of this position as somebody to call to say, I'm having a communication issue. I don't want to file for due process, but I need to speak to somebody who can resolve it outside of, say, my campus or my IEP system, my IEP team. Who could I talk to? And right now, because there's no special ed person or the special ed person who was there before, there wasn't that ability to call and ask questions on who to go to. How do I navigate through the school district's special ed system? For example, when every time I have an IEP and I have 3 kids and 3 IEPs, minimum, I get my parents' rights. And my parents' rights say, call the SELPA. You have ADR, Alternative Dispute Resolution. Well, you do that, but Santa Barbara and their SELPA don't really work in that vein properly the way the parent perceives it. So having a liaison person would be helpful to parents too. Again, the difficulty with that would be that person is a district paid employee. There's always that thought that person could have the district's intentions in mind and not the parents. But I applaud you that you're trying to figure that out. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would hope that the district and the parents have the same thought process. You know, this board feels that way very strongly. Ginny Kuhn.
So I like the vein of this and where it's going, and I think at some point, once you fine-tune it, it could be very helpful. But personally, I would also like to call the district and have the district staff know their state and federal law. I'd like for them to help me. You know, like I would really, really appreciate that. And then the people that come to the IEPs. I was in an IEP recently, and I asked for a social facilitation model for my son. And both the case manager, principal, and the district rep could not come up with a feasible social facilitation model. And this has happened ongoing for 6 years now. So I'm just saying that along these veins, I really hope that we can educate our special ed staff too to help parents. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Well, Mrs. Zawoski?
We will certainly work on this. I do want to say that the actual job description was sent to me from a special education parent, and it was an example of what, you know, and a few additions that were special to our district. So we can look back through it. We absolutely can look at the salary. That's something that, you know, I sort of questioned that actually myself too, but we were going by guidelines and all of that. So we'll look at, without trying to be limiting, increasing the qualifications, which of course will increase the salary, because we have to be, you know, it's based on levels within our personnel department. So we can do that. And the Spanish speaking, as we could put preference bilingual, we can always add that. We were intending to have like a translator available
Great.
for that.
All
anyway.
right, and board members, I want to point out that we are running far behind schedule at this point. So if you have a quick further comment,
Just
Mr.
quick.
Herron.
All these things, you know, another 2 weeks or 4 weeks, and we're at the end of the school year. It just seems that the original intent was not for a highly educated person necessarily. It was for the father who might have graduated from high school and has children with needs, special needs. He might qualify. I mean, I don't think you need to, this is just, this as I heard this discussion, it was somebody who they could just talk to and get guidance of where to take it. So it's not at the level of really highly qualified person. Now, maybe the examples of duties take it to that level, but I think we can reduce the examples of duties and still take this thing forward and get it accomplished.
Mrs. Cordero?
Two things real quick. One is that I agree with Dr. Noel's comments, though, that if this is going to be a district employee, we have to be certain that they're giving accurate information. And that does require a certain, I don't know that it necessarily requires a certain education level, but it certainly requires a certain background. My second question is, I really would, my preference would be not to say bilingual preferred, that be a requirement. Because my concern is, or that it be listed as one of the items that a person needs to be able to do. My concern is that if this position is one where parents are supposed to be able to feel comfortable calling and talking to the person and or coming in and speaking to the person, that relying on an interpreter really puts non-English speaking parents at a disadvantage. In addition, it's highly confidential information that they're sharing, which in my experience, often when we need an interpreter, we don't necessarily bring in someone who has the confidentiality training, et cetera, because we're just looking for anyone who can interpret. So that's my concern.
And Dr. Noel?
I just simply wanted to, as Mr. Herron was speaking, I had the same thought that a former special ed parent might, you might find some recruiting possibilities there, because we've already heard how much the amazing amount of knowledge that these parents have of the system, and so that would be a possible resource also. Just getting a bachelor's degree certainly is not enough. It's got to be a mix.
All right, well, I think there's lots of direction there. Okay, let's move ahead to E3, update on Youth Violence Prevention and Intervention Committee and approval of proposal to extend employment for one outreach worker in lieu of hiring a second outreach worker.
I would like Mr. Gonzalez to summarize the committee and discussions, but let me first of all state that we've started the process. We have a couple of board members serving on the committee. We've had a number of meetings. We're also working on a safety pyramid of prevention and intervention activities, and some of those activities apply to students across the district. I expect to appoint an outreach worker soon, and we'll be bringing that person to probably the next board meeting to introduce the person to you. And one of the primary purposes for having this on the agenda tonight is that in our discussions, it is very clear that connections and trust are issues that take time. And rather than use the money on 2 outreach workers until the end of June, we really feel that we need one person in place for a year's period of time, and that money would be better spent on just one position over a more sustainable period of time. And with that, Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarvis, members of the board. I think I'll simply summarize very quickly for you some of the highlights of the memo E3 that's attached to it. As Dr. Sarvis indicated, the committee has met twice. In the second paragraph, you will find the original composition of the steering committee as you folks directed. Since then, additional members have been added. They include Jacqueline Inda of the Esperanza Group. We've also included John Becchio, the principal of Santa Barbara Junior High, and we've also have incorporated Lane Wheeler as the representative from the Teachers Association. In our discussions, we have focused on a number of issues. One, that the work of the outreach worker should initially focus on junior high age students. 2, we've focused on an approach that is very individualized, much akin to the kind of program we operated as a pilot program this summer. As Dr. Sarvis has indicated, it's very clear to the committee that longevity and the ability to establish trust is critical in this kind of initiative, and therefore we are asking for an extension to hire one person for a much longer length of time. On the second page of attachment E2, you're going to find that 12 measures have been established as part of the evaluation process. In our most recent meeting that took place on January 8th. We are currently considering contracting with UCSB to conduct an evaluation, and we are entering discussions with the Santa Barbara County Education Office, who have similar positions and are in need of an evaluation component as presented to us. As Dr. Sarvis indicated to you, interviews were held on January 16th, and we have made a recommendation to the superintendent for one person that met all of the criteria, exceeded all of the criteria we have established. Board member Annette Gordetto was part of that initial interview team. I think I'll stop there and answer any questions you might have about the report and recommendation that we're making to the board.
Thank you. Board members, questions? Dr. Noel.
One thing I would seize upon instantaneously here, it looks like a member of the committee is going to do the evaluation, and I like to see separation along the same lines that we are getting an independent evaluation of our special ed program, and so whoever does the evaluation should have nothing to do with the planning. I think it's a great idea to extend the time. I like the consolidation of a resource, and I'm persuaded by this individualized gang intervention strategy prepared by Dr. Rios and his colleague, that more interventionists rely less on a set curriculum and are far more flexible to respond to the varying needs of their caseloads. They know the youth. This is a very personalized, individualized kind of relationship we're talking about here. And I think that emphasis is utterly crucial. That means building trust, all those good things that we've talked about before. And I think that's a great flavor and a great tone to set with this. I don't see I don't see a lot of openness to public input, and I do recognize that you've added a name or so that helps in that, but the process is not open. And as I think about it, I say, okay, but this is an interventionist. I'm not sure that an open process is necessary here. But when you come to prevention, or to developing prevention, which this committee is also charged with, I think then it flip-flops. That openness, participation, involvement of families, involvement of kids is utterly crucial to not just because they can generate some good ideas, which in my experience is indeed true, but because the whole thing needs to be legitimized. It has to come from the community. It has to be deeply connected with and linked to the community on an ongoing basis. And that's what led me to Dr. Sarvis. I sent you a note, and you, Mr. Gonzalez, to suggest the possibility that we bifurcate the committees and have a separate committee for prevention, and that it be a board committee with all of the. I understand the procedural accoutrements that go with a board committee, but that it be genuinely open, and that we then do a major outreach program to go with it, to get the community involved, and there would have to be efforts particularly to make sure this is a comfortable thing for low-income families and Hispanic families.
Any other board comments?
Well, as a member of the committee, I just wanted to concur with the report that I think all of us were completely convinced that trying to set up a position that would then end relatively soon would really be a disservice to the students. And the recommendation of one intervention specialist or outreach worker for an extended period of time was concurred with by everyone because of that. And so I just hope that we are seeing that. I don't want to actually get into any of the other discussions, but I feel comfortable that I think we're supportive of this. So I just wanted to give that as a member of the committee.
All right, we have public comment, but before, I do have one more quick question for you, and that is, will this person then be available for all the junior highs, or just one junior high, if we're just hiring one person, or?
I believe what the committee has settled on is that it'll be a caseload made up of our junior high students.
Okay, so it could be multiple junior highs.
Correct.
Depending on. Okay, Mr. Herron.
I had the same type of question. What is a caseload? How many students would this outreach worker be involved with? Who will they report to? Who will he or she report to? I was very pleased, as I think I said at the last meeting, that they've changed this to a South Coast initiative. And this proposal today is so far superior to what was going on 3, 4, 5 months ago that I think you've done a great job getting to this point. But is this and also third, is this person working all through the summer? And if so, who's responsible for the person during the summer?
By board action, this position reports directly to the superintendent. I suspect in conversations that I may have a role in guiding, mentoring, supervising the outreach worker that we do select. In answer to your first question, there is, at this time, no set number of students that this person is going to work with. What we will be asking our schools is to select our most at-risk gang-affiliated youngsters. And what we've heard from folks who work in this area, by making initial contact with gang students, students who are identified as gang members or potential gang members, it will grow from there. Certainly, we do not want to overwhelm the numbers, but I'll have a better idea of the caseload that we're going to be dealing with several weeks into this program. But there is no number right now.
And the person would continue through the summer, yes.
I would hope the emphasis would be, it's in here, gang members in danger of joining the gang and/or siblings of gang members. I would hope we would have a broad focus and get out of this, gonna just deal with gang members. I wish we could have a different word. The more we talk about gang members, the more gang members want to be gang members. So I hope you look at that whole array of kids to try to affect those that we can affect as best as possible.
Thank you.
All right, let's have public comment on it.
Carolyn Renard.
There are several issues with this proposal that I'm concerned with. One is the term they're going to be focusing on gang members or those in danger of joining a gang. This is an issue that involves, without being more clear on this, it can involve basically racial and ethnic profiling. I mean, who's to say who's in danger of joining a gang or not? And as you know, I am interested in this issue because of my involvement with children with disabilities, particularly learning disabilities and ADD and mental health problems. And the research all shows that probably close to 90% of the kids that are involved in the juvenile justice system have these kinds of disabilities or other disabilities. So these are the kids we're talking about, yet this issue is not even discussed here or focused on at all. But when you, and many of these kids who are floundering in school because of their unaddressed learning disabilities or mental health problems are these kids who are at risk of joining a gang. However, they're not criminals, and to identify them as being in danger of joining a gang is basically profiling them in a really inappropriate way, and this could lead to a lot of serious damage to kids. The other thing I'd like to say is that I saw in the board brief a little document go by from Bud Andrews to Mr. Sarvis saying, oh, by the way, we've added a new code to our discipline screen in the computer having to do with if it's an incident with a kid where they think that there's that the kid is, it's somehow a gang-involved incident, or they think it might be, they're going to code it that way in the kid's school records. The parents don't have any way of knowing that that's happening. You're not getting, there's no issue, there was nothing in that policy about notifying the parents, nothing about getting the parents' permission. I really think you guys need to be on top of this.
Carolyn?
Pardon?
Can we please keep to the topic that's on the agenda?
I'm speaking to the topic of the definition of in danger of joining a gang. This is in the proposal, these very words, and that's what I'm speaking to. The other thing that I have an issue with is the outcome measures developed by Dr. Rios. They are all negative measurements of
About 25 seconds.
Negative measurements of whether they are having gang-related behaviors. I mean, this is the 21st century. This is a doctor. We have UCSB, a world-class institution. You have to replace negative behaviors with positive behavior. There's nothing to measure that. This is ridiculous.
Thank you.
All right, we need a motion to extend the employment for one outreach worker for 1 year in lieu of hiring a second outreach worker. Dr. Noel?
I'm happy to make the motion.
Okay.
But I wanted to make a point
Mhm.
along with making the motion.
All right.
Okay. This point's come up not long before Ms. Bernard brought it up. The possible connection between learning disabilities and risk of joining gangs, shall we put it that way. And would there be some way to have as part of the training of this person, maybe part of the job description, but certainly the training, that they can become sensitized to this? And surely they can't do assessments, I understand that, but they can talk to the principal, they can talk to teachers and say, raise the question, is this kid possibly eligible for services for students with learning disabilities?
I'd be happy to answer that. Absolutely. One of the roles of this person would be to know what resources are available, to avail the student, the family to those resources. That means knowing the whole array of community resources and the involvement of the Center for Community Education. We have Ben Romo here from the county education office, for example. All of the organizations that work with us in the county or South Coast Collaborative on youth violence. Special education is certainly one of those, because there are a lot of resources available within the school, whether they're special education services, whether they're counselors at the school, or other significant people. They might be fighting back YSSs at the school. I mean, there might be a number of issues involved, and this person would have to know that full array of services so that they can get this kid or these kids connected with those. Yes.
All right, Mrs. Cordero?
I just want to make sure, because members of the public watch this on when it's televised, that members of the public are aware that this is a position that is not one of punishment or disciplinary position, et cetera. This is a position that's intended to be supportive to the students. When we say students who are at risk or students who are identified with gang affiliation, it's because they actually have been identified in some way. But it's not a way of tracking them into the juvenile justice system. It's not a way of steering them into any kind of disciplinary process. This is really intended to support them. And I think if people knew, for example, if you know Dr. Rios, or you know some of the other people who are on the steering committee, Mr. Lopez Aguado, some of the other members of the committee, you would know that many of us on this committee have a long, very long history of advocating on behalf of students and a long history of opposing any attempt to criminalize Latino youth. So this is really something that's coming from people who have long supported Latino youth in our community.
Mr. Herron?
Yeah, one question I forgot to ask. It's been mentioned by a member of the public that using
Pupil retention funds?
pupil retention block grants is not a proper use for this project. Do you have any comment on that?
Yes, that assertion is incorrect. We have checked with the State Department of Education, and they have verified that it is a very appropriate use of these funds.
All right, there's a
Thank
My motion is to adopt the recommendation appearing at the bottom of page 2 in this report.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We will now move on to E4, approval of bylaws and appointment of committee members for Parcel Tax Citizens Oversight Committee.
Well, we've been working with legal counsel, and as I reported at our last meeting, we need to establish our parcel tax oversight committees. Based on your direction at our last meeting, we rushed out to get nomination forms from people, and we don't have a full set of names to give you tonight. We had a lot of people apply for the secondary committee, not even the full 7 apply for the elementary committee, and we didn't get applicants in each of the areas. So we'd like you to go ahead and establish the committee. We'd like to be able to bring those applications to board members and then have you designate the committee members at a later point.
One thing that I want to point out is that we're modeling this after the Proposition 39 bond citizens oversight committees. However, they don't fit the purpose of a parcel tax perfectly. And one of the things that we noticed was that the bond committee needs to be in place quickly, because once your election is certified, you could be selling bonds and the money's coming in. Whereas in the case of the parcel tax, the money is not coming in until July. And so I hope that the board understands, especially in light of the fact that we didn't get enough members of the public applying for the elementary district, that we need to spend a little bit more time doing outreach. And in fact, the Education Foundation has offered to go out to the members of the public that they contacted before the election and notify them about the oversight committees and help them understand the process for applications. So at this point, any comments on the bylaws? Dr. Noel.
I just I had a little trouble with arithmetic here on page 2 of 9, membership, item 5.1, number. The committee shall consist of 7 members, as follows. And then for the life of me, I count the as follows, and then I can't get past 5.
I think that the other members can be at large. However,
6 and 7 are at large.
6 and 7 are at large. They're not specified. But I do have a suggestion for adding a number 6 for both the H committee and the I committee, and that is that we add 1 member who is on the board of the Santa Barbara Education Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I suggest that is because the Education Foundation was such an important part of the parcel tax election process. If this is a successful use of funds, it will be up for election again in 4 years if we decide to go in that direction. And I think it's very important that the Education Foundation know intimately what's going on so that they can talk to the public about it, because they'll need to go back and do that again in a very short amount of time. Dr. Noel?
In the spirit of the new Obama era, it did occur to me that we might want to invite whomever it was that wrote in opposition to the article to serve on the committee as well. That also could have very substantial benefits for a subsequent reelection. I know that's reaching a little farther than, but
yes.
But it is in the spirit of our times.
Yes. Mrs. Cordero?
Well, I'm not sure that I would support identifying someone's philosophical leanings as a delineation of who's going to be on the committee, but we certainly could adopt, as we're appointing people, the practice of trying to keep the ideologies diverse. I just wanted to suggest that we might add then, if the intent is to have a member at large, that we just add that one member. If we've
Right,
got the
okay.
6, then add one member at large.
Member at large, okay. Mr. Herron?
I see a technical, you're talking about officers serving for 2-year terms,
I'm sorry, what page are you on?
7 of 9. It says, these positions shall continue for two-year terms. But we're going to appoint the committee, and we're going to appoint some of them for 1 year. And if the person who we choose for 1 year ends up being president or one of these officers, they won't be there for 2 years. I don't know if that's a technical problem that can be worked out at the time, but it is sort of an inconsistency there. And I see Barbara at the podium, and just want to thank Barbara.
Barbara did a tremendous amount of work in putting this together and working with legal counsel on it.
She got it done in about 2 days. And before she even typed the final dot, Newshawk had it on their newswire. So I read it there before you even said you did it.
I think that only pertains to the officers. It doesn't pertain to all the members.
No, but if somebody gets chosen to be president and they're in a 1-year term slot, and this says they get that job for 2 years, which takes precedent? Do they then say, hey, I'm here for 2 years, you better reappoint me? I mean, will we get a president who was a 1-year term coming to us saying, you got to put me back on this because I've got a 2-year term, buddy?
I will talk to legal counsel about framing that perhaps a little bit differently. And one of the things I wanted to point out that our attorney said is that if, for example, we have trouble filling one of the categories, say a senior citizen, you can pick another candidate who perhaps doesn't have those particular links, and perhaps put that person in a 1-year term while it allows you that year to go look for someone who meets the criteria that you're looking for.
Mrs. Cordero?
Well, in light of this question about the 2-year terms, I understand, I assume I understand, the rationale for a 2-year term is that you want continuity.
Mm-hmm.
But many of our committees and even on the board, we have 1-year terms for our officers. So I'm just wondering if there would be any problem with simply changing that to 1-year term, and the committee itself can choose to extend the term of the officer by simply re-electing them.
Mm-hmm. I'll raise that with Mr. Covert.
And that's a very easy, just add the word annually after shall and drop off which positions shall continue for 2-year terms.
Okay.
All right, well, the board has made some suggestions. Would you like this to come back to see the final word? Or do you want to vote and pass it with the suggestions, assuming that legal counsel concurs? Any opinion?
I would move we approve it, and if the legal counsel comes up with wording that he likes better than what's here, based upon what we're talking about,
okay,
put it in.
All right,
Okay.
is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, it passes unanimously. And Dr. Sarvis, can you address when we need to have this when we need to have this committee actually appointed?
Well, there are a number of things that need to happen right away. We're talking to principals so that secondary principals at the junior high level have additional electives available on the ballot so that as students are looking at that ballot, they can choose among those electives. So that both junior high and high schools have on their ballots both foreign language and additional electives in arts and music. The elementary music program really needs some thoughtful construction. I know we put together a music program that was sort of the prototype of this, but we will want plenty of lead time in finding the people to fill that because they all need to be trained. So we need to move ahead on that. Although staff can go ahead and move ahead on these things, knowing darn well that we're going to bring them to the committee, and the committee is going to have oversight over that.
Any other comment? Mrs. Cordero?
I'm sorry, I just didn't hear the answer.
When
The
is-
question
yeah,
that you
when is
asked
it
is
gonna
when.
come?
Within a month.
Okay.
How would that be?
Okay.
So we will extend then the period of time for candidates for another, are
Let's
we
say
going to extend that for 30 days then?
Let's
Okay,
try
because
that
I
and
want to
see what
redo the application form and make sure that I'm reflecting it correctly as to what the deadline's going to be.
Well, if we could use something like a 3-week period so that we'd be able to bring it back to you within the next 2 weeks, or next 2 meetings, excuse me.
Okay.
And can I just ask a quick question about the application form?
Mhm.
Was it sent out in Spanish?
No, I can put that together and provide that, send that out.
I would like it to go out to the Spanish-speaking community.
All right.
Thanks.
All right, will do. And one of the things that I wanted to share with you also before we leave this topic is that there is a 60-day timeline which ends at the, as we're following the lead with the bond, the system that's in place for bonds, and that ends at the end of January. However, in conversation with legal counsel, he said that because of the fact that we are progressing, we are moving, we are in compliance with that. We don't have a committee in place, but you don't need to have that to meet that 60-day timeline.
All right. Thank you very much. And now we will move to E5, approval of tentative agreement between Santa Barbara School Districts and the Santa Barbara Teachers Association for early notification of retirement bonus.
And Dr. Chris Robertson will present this.
Thank you. Good evening. As you're aware, we will be faced with some difficult decisions in the months to come. The Santa Barbara School Districts and the Santa Barbara Teachers Association have tentatively agreed to a one-time early notification of retirement bonus for certificated employees in an effort to minimize the significant impact that potential layoffs can have for us. And it will also allow us to address staffing for 2009-2010 school year earlier than we have ever been able to do in previous years. What was agreed upon and negotiated was $150 to be offered to those certificated employees who submit a letter of retirement on or before February 20th, which is a Friday, and that these early notification letters would be submitted to the board for approval on or before the March 10th board meeting. With that in mind, it's hard to know exactly how many numbers to project at this point in time in terms of the funding. However, to date, I have received 3 letters, and we just put the letter out in terms of information pending board approval. So at this point, I'm recommending that the board approve the one-time early notification of retirement bonus.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
Second.
All those in favor?
I'm sorry, can I
Mrs.
just want
Cordero?
a quick comment in that I think a lot of us were disappointed that we weren't able to negotiate a higher bonus. And I know that we had anticipated something a little bit higher, but I'm hoping that this will still give an incentive for people to let us know early. And given that you have 3, maybe it is, but no response necessary. I just wanted to comment that it would have been nicer to have a higher amount, and I know we tried to get that, so.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It passes unanimously.
Thank you.
And now it's time for board action on student expulsion case number 0809-27.
I move that we accept the findings and recommendations of the hearing panel in case 08/09-27.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. All right, we are now on to our break. We're running about 20 minutes behind schedule. I would like you to know that item F3, request to speak to the Board of Education regarding fighting back, has been pulled. So let's go ahead and take our break. Now to the conference agenda, and up next, F1, report on process and timeline for implementation of mid-year and 0910 budget reductions.
Eric Smith, our Deputy Superintendent, will present this.
Thank you, Dr. Sarvis. In late or early January, I presented an item on the governor's proposed budget for 910. At that point in time, I gave the board information on both the governor's proposal for mid-year cuts as well as revenue reductions that were projected for fiscal year 910. At this point in time, we're identifying a timeline and process for budget reductions, both on a mid-year basis and also anticipating the revenue decreases that we're going to see in 9-10. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about the first interim report that was presented to the board on December 9th. Obviously, that first interim report was welcome in the sense that we were able to certify positive, meaning that we could demonstrate that we could meet our current year and subsequent 2-year fiscal obligations and still maintain our reserve level. In fact, we were able to demonstrate that we had a significant ending balance as of last year, basically ostensibly showing that our fiscal recovery from last year is now complete. However, on the heels of that fiscal recovery, the governor unveiled probably the worst education budget in California's history, and I'll get into some of those details in a moment, but basically looking at a $41.6 billion deficit over an 18-month time frame, with about $30 billion of that due to lost revenue and about close to $11 billion of it dealing with additional expenditures relative to increase in caseloads. So once we started analyzing those numbers, it was obvious that we were going to have to follow a process that was similar to what we followed last year. However, rather than putting together a fiscal recovery plan, we're going to put together a fiscal solvency plan that will basically sustain our fiscal recovery. I think one of the things that's important to look at is on a macro basis what's driving this. I mean, obviously, we're seeing these huge numbers, mostly related to the decrease in the housing and credit markets. We're seeing unemployment circling or hovering right around 9%. And we're seeing one of the things that has really never been discussed in the past is the state's reliance on personal income tax, and especially the top 1%, and the volatility of that tax when it's basically subject to capital gains. So when we see wide swings in capital gains, we're seeing that basically when those income earners are not making a lot of money, everybody suffers. And that's just the way the income structure is in California. So that's probably something that I think ultimately will have to be revisited. In October, we knew that something had to happen. After the state budget was adopted, we started hearing, rumors that we're $8 billion out of balance in current year, and then it just grew and grew and grew. As you know, the legislature is engaged in 4 extraordinary sessions and still has not produced a mid-year package. Symptomatic of any entity, governmental entity that takes in, or expends more than it takes in revenue, the state's basically looking at running out of cash here, maybe as early as February. Now, what that means for us is, school districts are protected in the sense that in the pecking order, they're second after the state pays debt service. Well, when the state says that they're going to run out of cash, it doesn't mean they're going to complete run out of cash. It means they won't be able to pay some of their vendors and they'll pay some on IOUs. But we're fairly well protected because of our pecking order on the macro level, and then on a micro level because of our good cash position and the fact that most of our revenue limit dollars are basically from property taxes. Our revenue limit, which is about $92 million between both districts, is about $82 million out of property taxes. And as you remember, in general purpose dollars or revenue limit dollars, there's an inverse relationship between property taxes and state aid. You have an entitlement. If your state aid goes up, property taxes go down, or vice versa. It's the one way to look at it. So you never get any more of that entitlement. But since we're basically highly funded in property taxes in our revenue limit, that's a good thing because you're not relying on Sacramento to send you a check. In any event, when we started analyzing the governor's mid-year proposal and his proposal for 9-10, those are really the first milestones in the development of our budget for 9-10. And as you know, the governor's proposing the following for 8-9, the elimination of the 0.68% cost of living adjustment, which we never budgeted, a 4.5% reduction in the revenue limit, which basically equivalates to about $315 per student for us, or $4.3 million in lost revenue between both districts. And then looking at 9-10, we're looking at an additional first zero COLA, and then we're looking at an additional 2.4% reduction in revenue limit, or $154 per student, or roughly $2.1 million between both districts. Now, as a means of mitigating this, the governor's basically given us this flexibility proposal. And remember, these are all proposals at this point because we don't have the legislature signing off on it. But basically, the flexibility proposals are 4. The first one is basically to use state categoricals, sweep them from the restricted side to the unrestricted side, both in terms of restricted ending balances, but also we'll have the flexibility to move current year apportionments in 910 from the restricted to the unrestricted side. Basically, we have the ability to suspend our deferred maintenance match if we want to in either one of the districts or both of the districts. We have the ability to reduce our routine restricted maintenance account from 3% to 1%. And we also could, if we wanted to, reduce our reserve for economic uncertainties from 3% to 1.5%. All of those things have to be restored in fiscal year 10-11. So in my mind, we want to be very circumspect about what, if any of those, we really want to use. So one of the things we will look at is we will look at our current year restricted ending balances, and we may look at what we can do with categorical income relative to next year. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that will look. But one of the things we did immediately is we took steps once we knew the governor's proposal. We instituted a spending freeze, and I think you've seen that. That pertains not only to unrestricted dollars, but also state categorical dollars because of the reasons I mentioned. We basically put a freeze on extra time and overtime. We're basically leaving vacant positions unfilled, and we're only filling positions on a mission critical basis. So as we start developing our plan, and we really can't solidify what our plan is until the governor and legislature sign off on what their plan is, we hope to bring something back basically over a series of meetings, but ultimately to 2 meetings in April, so the board can adopt basically a fiscal solvency plan. And in my mind, it looks like a couple of things. Obviously, we're going to have to identify some level of ongoing expenditure reductions and or revenue enhancements. But we know that just a $6 million loss in revenue alone is too much to do in 1 year. We'll have to contemplate burning some of our reserve, and then we're going to have to look at how we can bolster our reserve, probably both through the use of categorical funds and also due to the spending freeze and the efficiencies and the things we can do this year, similar to what we did last year. Now, I do have to eat a little crow because I heard from the feds that we are going to see some federal money. So when board member Herron asked me about that, what we're hearing out of the Obama administration is there will be increases not only to areas that we really can't touch, like Title I, but there could be potential increases to IDEA and special ed, some facilities dollars, and some money that's specifically identified to offset budget cuts at the local level. However, once again, this is only a proposal, and so we don't know what it's going to look like. So I think this document is going to be varied and complex because there are going to be a lot of different things in it to look at, and we're going to have to cobble together our best approach. I think the other thing we want to talk about is that in addition to the flexibility issues and craftsmanship, Meg's going to come up and show you that because of the severity of the cuts in the elementary district, we're going to transition to basic aid. So the issue is going to become, we have a lot of inter-districts. That's something the board's going to have to consider. Now, what will happen is once you get into basic aid, is at that point, the rules as we know them relative to increase in revenue, relative to increased students, that goes away. We're in a reverse situation. So we'll look at that in a moment, but I think we need to look at all of those factors, and that's why this plan is going to be so complex. So in any event, one of the things we've done is in addition to the kind of administrative things, we've started to engage our stakeholders relative to the issue. We've apprised the employee associations of the issue. We're soliciting input from staffs. Brian and I have been out already. We're going to continue to get out and meet with all the staffs and get input and basically try and get as much input to put together a plan and do it in a collaborative process similar to what we did last year. So as you see the time frame, what we're hoping to do is February 10th is do the mid-year reductions. Now, what I'm hoping at that point is that the governor and legislature have signed off on something so we can do flexibility issues. What I mean by that is, moving categoricals, basically making some decisions that really don't touch people, but basically they're what I'd call budget craftsmanship type things. then obviously we're going to have to make some decisions relative to noticing, even though we don't have a plan, because we won't have our plan complete until April, although we'll have a pretty good idea of what's happening and what the severity of the cuts are. But one of the other things I should speak to is the issue with flexibility, and the categorical flexibility implies that all the rules on those dollars are suspended for 2 years. So things such as instructional materials, the timeline for adoption, things like, let's say EIA, let's say the class size limitations on K3 CSR, all those things would be suspended. So we're in a whole different arena, and obviously we have to have discussions with both our employee associations and all the stakeholders about what that means and what the best way of getting through this crisis. Then we'll also be bringing forward, hopefully, if the federal dollars are basically quantifiable by mid-February, and that's what we're hearing, that will be basically a prong in our approach too. So we're really looking at, in my mind, 3 prongs. We're looking at what we do on an ongoing basis in terms of expenditure reductions and revenue enhancements, what we're going to do on a one-time basis relative to basically both categorical flexibility and hopefully bolstering our ending fund balance, and then looking at what kind of federal relief we're going to get, if any, and we'll be able to hopefully quantify that by mid-February. So the rest of the time frame is basically laid out. We're hoping that we have the first reading of the fiscal solvency plan by April 14th, the second reading by April 28th. We'll have a board review of the preliminary 9-10 budget by June 9th, and an adoption of the final budget by June 23rd. And those are all consistent with our budget development calendar, except it seems like every time we put together one of those calendars, it's preempted by a crisis. So, but I think we're still doing a pretty good job of aligning that relative to our calendar. We just had to put a couple more steps in there. So that's what our plan is at this point in time. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Board members? Any questions? I want to thank you for all this information. I'm very interested to see what comes up in terms of categorical flexibility. Some of the things, what you're saying about class size reduction, for example, really surprises me. So I look forward to hearing more about that. And we have public comment.
Lane Wheeler.
Lane Wheeler, Santa Barbara Teachers Association. Well, Megan, I dance over here. I'd like to thank the board for their preemptive action of bringing Eric Smith to our district, and I'd like to thank Eric and his departments for the great work that they've done up to this point. And I will give Dr. Sarvis some creds on that one also, because I think he helped direct that process. So thank you to all of you. This is an extremely painful period that we're going to be experiencing. I would encourage you to make cuts as far away from the classroom as you can. I think all of you have already had that information tattooed on some part of your body so that you can read it every day and remember it. I have encouraged our staff, our certificated unit staff, to think of ways to enhance our budget resources rather than make cuts. I'm asking the district to be sensitive when they go out and reach out to teachers and our other certificated unit members so that they're not asking them to pick one program over another. We don't want to get into another thing where elementary librarians are cut and secondary librarians are spared. It becomes very divisive, and I'm not sure it's going to be a productive activity. Once again, I thank Eric for his effort to make sure this is moving along in a very smooth process. The earlier we can know where we are, the better things I think we'll be able to project out and know exactly how many cuts we're going to have to be making. Those March 15th, April 15th deadlines are quick approaching us. Once again, that's going to be another heart-wrenching experience for those folks who receive those either termination notices for the temps or the RIF notices for those folks who are on the tenure track. I want to also remind you that suspension of state monies will include suspension of program requirements that are placed on us. So I would encourage you to remember that as we move forward, and knowing the initiatives that you want to take forward, realizing that if state monies are cut, that we don't necessarily have to fill the requirements of that state money as it normally would come in. We're here to work with you on this and to be partners in it. It's a very difficult process. I'm not looking forward to it, and I'm thankful for the work that we've had done so far and the position in which we are now sitting, and hopefully it'll be a similar situation when the year ends and we won't be having bake sales to solve our problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. All right, thank you, Mr. Smith. And we will move on to E2, which is update on the elementary district basic aid.
Well, as you just heard, becoming basic aid in the elementary district is a distinct possibility. Meg Jeté is our Director of Fiscal Services.
Thank you. Well, you're looking at a condensed version of the revenue limit calculation. And in column A is what we did at first interim. The ADA is the exact same. We get down to the deficit is the same. Come down to the very end, which is our total state aid, is 1.6 million. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just wondering if there's any way to enlarge this because it's very difficult to see. Thank you.
Okay, and column B is what the state's proposed mid-year cuts are. So this is first interim with everything exactly the same until you get down to the deficit, which is about 9.8%. Then we go down here, and as you can see, everything remaining the same, we're $365,000 in state aid. That's not a good place to be because you're teetering right on revenue limit and basic aid. It's a tough place to be. Column C is our first interim with the state proposed mid-year cuts, less our inter-district transfers as of this year, which is 313 kids. So it's the ADA minus 313. You come down here, down to the state aid line, and there we are, $1.2 million in basic aid. Now, the reason why I did this is just to let you see how the inter-district transfers would affect us this year, or do affect us this year. Can I have the next one? Going into 9-10, we have the same sort of calculation with our new revised numbers for 9-10. This is what this is elementary only, by the way. Our elementary numbers, our increase COLA of 5%, and then we have our 16.68% deficit. These are with our transfers kids in it, so no change. Come down here, we are basic aid, and again, we're only basic aid by a very small number, and it's not a good place to be. However, if we do eliminate assuming that we have 313 transfers next year, we come down to the, we deduct them from our ADA from over here. Our basic revenue limit remains the same. Come down here for the 16% decrease. I did make a 2% increase in our property taxes, and I did up the charter school in lieu property taxes there. It's about 21% of our taxes, and we're $1.9 million into basic aid. This is a good, nice place to be if you're going into basic aid. And over here on column G are where our transfers are coming from. As you can see, about 192 are coming from local other districts near us, and it's about, those are all basic aid districts. I think Hope went basic aid this year, Carp went last year, and Goleta's been basic aid for several years. The rest are revenue limit districts. Now, if we become basic aid, or when we become basic aid, if everything pans out like we anticipate it to, our one revenue source that we can pull back is the amount of property taxes, the in lieu charter taxes that we give our charter schools, in lieu property taxes to the charters. We can get money back from their inter-district transfers. So if we have kids coming from Goleta that are going to Peabody, we can, on Peabody's attendance records, they say, hey, we have 10 kids from Goleta. And they do a calculation against their base revenue limit, the CDE, and gives us back money. Does everybody understand that? That's kind of
I'm just
confusing.
surprised because that is not anything that I'd heard before, so I'm.
But it's only if you're basic aid. Once you fall in basic aid, these charters are taking your property taxes. The kids in that charter school that are not in your district, we're paying local taxes towards those kids. So all the kids that are in Goleta, Hope, Carp, all of that will be registered on their attendance as being inter-district transfers, and we will get reimbursed from the state from that money.
Okay.
Is that 100% reimbursement, Meg?
No,
or is
it's
it-
not.
It's a partial reimbursement.
It
Is it a
used to be
70%?
about 70% of the base revenue limit of the district they're coming from, and every base revenue limit is unique. So they do some quirky calculation, but it's probably below 70%. It's less than 70%, but I think it's more than 50.
Mrs. Okay, Mrs.
Thanks.
Cordero?
Does that only apply to students who are coming from a basic aid district? Or does it apply to students who are coming from any district?
Basic aid districts do not reimburse another basic aid district. But Peabody is not a basic aid charter. Charters cannot become basic aid. So everyone that they're in, I believe we should get some sort of transfer from, but I'm still thinking the basic aids do not have to put money into that. It's only the revenue limit districts. But
Okay.
I'd have to confirm that.
And then the other question I have is, the money that we get reimbursed, is that subtracted from the other district or from Peabody?
No, it's not subtracted from Peabody.
Okay.
The state backfills us,
So
basically.
it just comes from the state?
Yeah, but it's not, it will not affect our basic aid calculation. It's
Right.
in a different bucket.
So,
Okay,
so
thank
Meg,
you.
basically, when I look at the slides, based on the severity of the state deficit, on the natural, we become basic aid, but on the cusp, really.
On the cusp.
And so the significant variable here is the number of inter-districts and what the board ultimately decides there, so.
And maybe Dr. Hayden can answer this question for me. It looks like if we have a total of 313 total transfers, is that evenly divided among the 7 grade levels? So can you say that a normal incoming class has about 40 to 45 transfers in it? I don't know if you have that information.
I have it, unfortunately, I have it sorted by alphabetically. But I do have their grade levels. And I'm not, I know that a lot of them come from OHS, is that the?
OAS?
OAS.
Open Alternative. And I'll certainly open this up to the board members, but I just want to, we all watched this process in a neighboring district, and it was very painful and difficult, and I'm not sure that we would want to do it the same way. So I think that we would want the information of what's the range if we said, okay, we're going to keep our existing transfers, but we're going to close to new transfers. What could we estimate that would mean if we were going to say keep upper grade, but let the lower grades go back to the districts? I think we would need all that kind of information.
One of the things that occurred to me because I was sensitive to that issue is that if the board's going to contemplate some kind of rescission or any kind of rescission, some kind of transition over several years or something like that, contemplating some of the variables you're talking about.
But I mean, essentially, for example, with this, it's saying you'd have $2 million more than you would.
But remember, you also have to shed the associated expense.
Right.
Remember,
And
a
that's
basic
also
aid
true.
is not a panacea. I mean,
Right.
you have expense tied to those students, and you know where that expense is in a school district budget.
Right.
So that's just something to contemplate.
That's true also. But it definitely would affect what services might need to be cut to all students. It's
Yeah,
something that
you
we're really
end
thinking
up
about.
ultimately having more revenue per student for students that live within the district. At some, how you get there is a whole nother issue.
Board members, do you have any comments on this?
I would like to mention one thing. I have them listed here of why they're in the district. And we do have 15 students that are employee districts. 114 are just because they're continuing, and 138 are because they work in Santa Barbara, which is probably the Port Hueneme, Ventura, Oxnard. The other reasons are not that significant, but I wanted to point out that 15 at least are coming from our people who work in the Santa Barbara School District.
Okay. Mrs. Cordero?
I just wondered if we could get that information, the breakdown that you just read us, and also the breakdown by grade.
Yes.
Would be really useful. And school?
Yes, I think.
Yeah, I think and school.
I have
would be
that
good
right
too.
here.
Great. And that can come to us, I think, in a board brief.
Yes, I think it would also be very useful to get the number of new transfers this year, whether they came in through kindergarten or came in through some other grade level, just so we have some idea of how many new transfers we might be talking about next year.
That's true. It wouldn't just be kindergarten. Mr. Herron?
And can we make it very clear that this is information only? It's not leading down a path to anything. It's just information.
Although I do have to say that if we are going to make any change, even closing to new students, that was one of the really distressing things that has gone on, is that it happens so late in the year that if we're going to make even a change for new students, it needs to be done promptly.
By March 1st.
Well, we could always rescind transfer agreements, I suppose, but it would be more difficult. There are staffing implications. Right. Okay, by March 1st. So, if we're doing it for 9/10, so we need to have that information quickly and come back to this soon. All right, thank you. And will we get hard copies of this also, I hope?
Of this?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
It would be best if I could give you this in, are you all Excel?
Yes.
Excel literate?
Because then you can sort any way you want, by school,
super.
by name, by grade.
That would be wonderful.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. F3 was pulled. So now we are going to move on to F4, request to speak to the Board of Education regarding district enrollment trends and suggested school district's name change. Dr. Lanny Ebenstein.
President Parker, members of the board, Dr. Sarvis, I have a little less than a 10-minute presentation, and if you have any questions after it, I'd be happy to try to respond. It's a great privilege to have the opportunity to address you this evening. My comments are primarily an analysis of enrollment trends in the Santa Barbara Elementary School District. The districts are currently in negotiation with the City of Santa Barbara for acquisition of the property at 125 South Calle Cesar Chavez. This would, in the long term, allow a new elementary school on the site of the current M&O facility, together with the adjacent administrative offices. The first graph is a depiction of enrollment in the elementary district from 1925 to 2005 at 5-year intervals. As you can see, at the beginning of this period, the district had about 3,000 students. This went down somewhat during the Great Depression and World War II, and then began a long climb to just over 6,000 students in the late 1960s. From this point, the district experienced a sharp drop in enrollment until the early 1980s, and then starting in the mid-1980s, the districts began a sharp enrollment increase and reached their greatest enrollment ever in 2000. Since then, the elementary district has been in a period of modest declining enrollment, and this year has 5,741 students. What will the future bring with respect to enrollment? At this point, it is worthwhile to consider the second graph, which is the micro trend since 2005. In 2005, the elementary district enrolled 5,876 students, and this declined by 236 students during the next 2 years to 5,640 students in 2007. All of these data are the annual CBEDS reports. But this year, the elementary district has increased in enrollment by 101 students. Will this trend of increasing enrollment continue? Now, I had not earlier heard the basic aid discussion, so some of these comments would be influenced by transfer policies. But since that's a decision that has yet to be made by the board, we'll continue on the basis of current policy. My guess is that it is likely the elementary district will increase by perhaps another 50 students next year, and then plateau in enrollment in the vicinity of 5,600 to 5,800 students for the next several years. In the long run, I believe the secular trend of increasing enrollment will continue, and that's a long-run trend in terms of over years and decades, as opposed to 5-year increments, as opposed to on a year-to-year basis. The decline in enrollment during the 1970s and early 80s was a result of a shift in birth trends, and I do not see a similar shift in the future. In addition, there will be more growth in the city of Santa Barbara, mostly in the downtown and Lower East Side. For these reasons, I believe the best course for the districts to follow is continue to work with the city to acquire the 125 South Calle Cesar Chavez site. 2 more graphs should be of interest. The third graph is the average elementary school enrollment in South Coast elementary districts in 2007. As you can see, the Santa Barbara district is number 1, but it is not exactly in a category we would like to be. On a weighted average, attendance area elementary schools in Santa Barbara have about 35% more students per school than in neighboring school districts. In addition, these figures do not include child development and preschool programs on our sites. If one considers all children on school sites, pre-K as well as kindergarten through 6th grade, then there are closer to 45% more children on the average school site in the Santa Barbara Elementary District than in other school districts on the South Coast. The final graph may also be of interest. It is of enrollment in the Goleta Union School District and Santa Barbara Elementary District in 1972 and 2007. As you can see, in 1972, the Goleta District had an enrollment in excess of 6,800 students, about 1,300 students more than in Santa Barbara at that time. Now Goleta Union has about 3,500 students, more than 2,100 students less than in Santa Barbara. This is a shift of about 3,400 students between 1972 and 2007 from Goleta to Santa Barbara. While I do not have as extensive records in Carpinteria, the data I have indicate there's also been a shift of students from Carpinteria to Santa Barbara in recent years. So my feeling is that from a long-range perspective, and whenever you're looking at facilities, it's not a question of what's the enrollment on a year-to-year basis, or even a question of several hundred transfer students. It's a question of what direction do you think the community is going in the long run, and what you believe that the best course is for the future. And my belief is that, and I think that of many others, is that the goal of trying to acquire that site is one that should be a high priority of the district, or should be a top priority. How could this acquisition be effectuated? I believe the district should consider a diverse portfolio of funding sources to acquire and build on the 125 South Calle Cesar Chavez site, including city redevelopment agency funds, district developer fees, state funding, and a bond in the elementary district. If the last of these were considered, a bond that would be a part of a total funding package, including these other sources, should be sought. I would advocate that such a bond be very targeted and, for all things considered, a relatively modest amount compared to some of the previous bonds. While I think it may make sense to include other items, a few other items, such as libraries at Adams and Washington, I believe the goal should be to keep any bond amount to the $12 million or so range. Since general elections in California are now, unless they are special elections, held almost exclusively in even-numbered years, this would mean that the next 2 possible dates for an election would be June or November 2010, which are not far away. And then if you project to 2012, if there's a possibility that parcel taxes may be renewed at that time, that might mean that the next election after that might be until 2014. So this is something that if you were interested in, you really, I think, would have to consider the possibility of a 2010 election. Finally, in request to the idea of in my request for agenda item, I also suggested that it may be advisable to consider changing the name of the Santa Barbara High School District. I don't see this as anywhere near the importance of the facility and enrollment issues discussed here. But one of the things I noted in the Measure H campaign last fall was that many people do not realize they live in the Santa Barbara High School District as a result of the name. Perhaps you could have a subcommittee or request the Public Education Fund to consider this possibility. Possible names I have heard are the Santa Barbara Goleta Montecito Secondary School District, the Santa Barbara Secondary School District, or the Greater Santa Barbara Secondary School District. Any of these would, I think, be an improvement over the existing name. I should mention that in the early 90s, the board changed the name of the Santa Barbara School District. The elementary district was that time titled the Santa Barbara School District. No one knew what it referred to, and it was, I think, a positive change to clarify that it was the elementary school district. I noted that the sign out front still continues to say Santa Barbara School District.
It's historical.
So, yeah, so it's not something that requires much cost. The point is, it's more a matter when you reprint the stationery. I mean, the point is there's no new cost. So, in any event, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to respond. But as I said, I appreciate the opportunity to offer you thoughts on what I believe is an important enrollment and facility issue for the district.
Questions or comments? I appreciate the information that you've brought forward and your suggestions. I actually really appreciate the name change idea also. I think that we all faced this as we ran for school board, that I'd have so many people say, oh, yes, but I'm not in your district. And I'm like, well, you used to live south of El Capitan, you are. And I also don't think of it as the high school district. I think of it as the secondary district. So that's something that we maybe should consider. Mr. Herron?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I know, having just gone through it myself, my own daughter didn't know she could vote for me, you know. So I know personally that it, you know, I had to twist her arm to tell her she could. You know, I appreciate that aspect too. And what the name is, who knows, but you gave some good suggestions. But put that aside, I'd just like to thank you for your letter you wrote to the Montecito Journal about Santa Barbara Junior High. Because that was followed up by Fred Rifkin and followed up by the publisher telling people to, hey, give Santa Barbara Junior High a chance. So I appreciate your letter.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Price?
Could I just interject one thing on the name change? I know all of you are aware, and I think Dr. Ebenstein is, that a more recent name change occurred when the district adopted the single school district resolution perhaps 3 years ago. And for almost all purposes, the districts are now referred to both together as the Santa Barbara School Districts in the plural. And the only distinction that is left, according to the Ed Code, has to do with the separate property ownership and taxation. So that's not to undercut at all the point that you're making, that when it does come to parcel tax, bond elections, and just the general public information, people are confused. But the effect of a name change, for example, to the high school district would be much different and less than would have been the case several years ago.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you. And finally, well, not finally, but for now, F5, discussion of procedural matters in the conduct of board meetings. This was an item that Dr. Noel requested to be on the agenda. I also then added some language that I would like to discuss now also, that I gave you all copies of, and they're copies for the public in the back. But I don't know, Dr. Sarvis, if you have any comments, or if we should just open this up to Dr. Noel first. Dr. Noel, do you want to go ahead and start this?
I'm looking for what you just referred to.
It's blue, and it says proposed return to regular session agenda section. And this is just on how we structure the first part of the agenda. But you can go ahead and you had some different comments that you wanted to make. So if you want to go ahead and do that, Dr. Noel.
Yeah, I do. I want to, I have two issues that I wanted to have to discuss under this. And in the meantime, we had a report from Mr. Price, a letter from Mr. Price explaining one of the issues that had come up. And in it, he refers to the section of the Brown Act 54954.3, where it says, in addition, this is basically, it sets out an exception to the Brown Act's agenda requirements, and the phraseology is, in addition, on their own initiative or in response to questions posed by the public, a member of a legislative body or its staff may ask a question for clarification, make a brief announcement, or make a brief report on his or her own activities. And it was, Mr. Price, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he, if I understand correctly, said that, basically said that that in and of itself constitutes appropriate grounds for including the superintendent's report without a detailed description. Do I have that right?
Let's say yes for the time being.
I'm not leading you anywhere. Well, but what strikes me about that, and it's something, is that it also gives the board members the same right under those grounds to make brief reports and ask questions so in some sense it puts the board members and the if that's the basis for the argument about the superintendent's report agenda, then it puts the superintendent's report on the same basis as a brief report by a board member. And I think it anticipates that we're talking about brief reports about, I think the actual phrase is about activities. Brief report on his or her own activities. Okay. We haven't, in my recollection, we don't have much precedent for board members or staff members doing that.
Although it is agendized at the end of every board meeting, but we don't take advantage of it.
Well, but this doesn't, this would seem to be more, yes, we have board comments at the agenda, at the end of every board meeting, but this doesn't restrict it to at the end of the meeting or to that item. This says that in response to questions proposed by the public or a member of a legislative body or its staff may ask a question for clarification, make a brief announcement, brief report, and so on.
Does it say brief report for the board members? I can't.
Yes, it does.
Well, we can look and see what it actually says, but I think that the question that's being raised here has to do with the authority for the superintendent report and whether there's any corresponding authority that would give board members the same opportunity. And if I'm right in putting the question that way, the answer is yes, because the section of the Brown Act that you just referred to, Dr. Noel, is the source of authority for both superintendent's reports or another agencies, city administrator reports, district manager reports, and so on. And likewise, at the foot of the agenda, you have board comments. Now, the descriptive language that is in place under the heading board comments is a little bit different than what is in place, I think, under the superintendent's report. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but that whatever those small differences are may or may not make a difference. But the point, I think, perhaps is that when either a board member at the end of the meeting wishes to raise an issue briefly, it is not intended to result in a dialogue at that time. The idea is that there is something that is stated, something that's described, some activity that has gone on, and if there's an interest in bringing the matter back for a fuller discussion, the theory under the Brown Act, or the approach, is that there should then be a request to have that matter put on the agenda. Similarly, when the superintendent or the city administrator or the like gives her or his report, there's not an intention or even the ability under the Brown Act for there to be a substantive dialogue, because the same section of the government code that you read says that, except for these exceptions, there's not to be a discussion, etc., except for agendized items. So I'd say the same thing. So when the superintendent in his report covers something that, you know, involves some substance that one or more board members believe should result in a substantive dialogue, then certainly at the end of the agenda, when it comes to board comments, a board member can briefly say, well, I agree, I don't agree with that, or maybe at the end of the superintendent's report, but there shouldn't be a dialogue that goes on until the matter is brought back and placed on the agenda. And I don't know, I made a short question into a long answer, but I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, very much. Yes, it's very helpful. But it raises another question, and that is I don't see in this wording anything that suggests the end of the agenda. And one of my concerns is that this, having the superintendent's report at the top of the agenda and board comments at the end of the agenda makes any kind of connection between the two almost meaningless, because the end of the agenda is usually after 10 and 15 at night. And it's just a long time since from the top of the agenda. And especially I make that point in the context of the language here, which links the board, the brief comments come after a comma, may ask a question for clarification, comma, make a brief announcement, or comma, or make a brief report on his or her own activities. See, now, and one of the things when in our exchange of views, one of the things I was going to suggest, a possible solution to this would be to have board comments up at the top of the meeting, along with the superintendent's comments. And I did some reviewing just to see what was practiced in other districts, and it was a lot of them don't have superintendent's comment report. A lot of them do. A lot of them have board comments up with the superintendent's report. A lot of them don't. There's a mixed bag about what they do. Yeah, period. As comma, semicolon.
Well, I see them as actually quite two completely different things. And what I would suggest is that we simply take the Brown Act language that includes things like brief report, and because you're talking about a response to the superintendent's report, and make that language match up with the Brown Act, so it includes things like brief report under this description that goes with superintendent's report. And then we go ahead and keep the board comments at the end, because that shouldn't, in fact, it seems like it could lead to a violation of the Brown Act if you're starting a dialogue in that way with things that aren't agendized. But it would still give you the opportunity to do things, have different matters or correspondence that you want to bring up that are not related to the superintendent's report.
But what brought this up was my perception that the superintendent was raising substantive issues in the superintendent's report, which reflected one position on those issues, and then and there I felt that I had a right to comment on that. Now, what you're saying is if this gives a board member that right, it's not until 2-3 hours later, and I would like to think that we have a little more balance between administrative perspectives and legislative perspectives, that we would have them more closely juxtaposed, that opportunity more closely juxtaposed.
Mrs. Cordero?
I just had a quick question. Dr. Noel, what was the document you were reading from?
The Brown Act.
Oh, you're just reading a copy of the Brown Act?
Well, excerpts.
Okay.
Yeah, right at the very top.
Okay.
It's the, Mr. Price was referring to it, the very authority that requires that prohibits discussion of an item that is not agendized makes, in the next sentence, makes this exception. And it's the only exception I'm aware of. Is that correct, Mr. Price?
Well,
Yeah, I think it is, and different agencies do it, of course, in many different ways, as you've pointed out. But there is justification, I think, for whether it's through separation of the items, as you have had for a very long time, which many other agencies do, or otherwise. We know under the Brown Act, because of some court cases, that there is an ability in an administrative report to speak to items which might be labeled as substantive. It's not restricted to procedural only. There's a limit on the amount. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Price. I didn't need the clarification. I just was asking the question of what the document was. So I understand that there's a lengthy sort of this analysis of what the Brown Act would cover, but that really wasn't what my question was. My question was just what was the document that was being read.
Okay, and I was going to just volunteer another bit of information apart from your issue, Mrs. Cordero, and that simply is that whether it's stated in the superintendent's report or whether it's stated in board comments, dialogue that results from that, one or more other members of the board, needs to be very, very limited. And the fact that there are 5 board members and 1 superintendent, makes at least a theoretical difference. Because, for example, if the superintendent says X, and then you have 4 or 5 board members that comment on their views with respect to X, that can readily turn it into a discussion which crosses some very gray line that just requires a judgment call. And I don't know if that's why board comments are usually put at the foot of the agenda. But again, the practice ought to be to limit responses, whether it's by board members to other board comments or whether it's responses to the superintendent's report, and keep anything that's going to be said brief, and then put it on the agenda and have a discussion all night if you want to, and then there won't be any issues.
No, I'm sorry. Could I continue?
Yes, Mrs. Cordero.
Thank you. The other question that I had was just in terms of what our agenda item is, discussion of procedural matters in the conduct of board meetings. I was just wondering, is the procedural matter that we're discussing here where we place the board comments, or was the procedural matter that you were thinking of whether or not we can comment on the superintendent's report?
And I will
both of those.
Yeah,
Okay.
I will address it. This was given deliberately a broad scope so that we could talk about the agenda in a very general way.
Okay, but I just want to make sure I'm kind of clear on what we're doing. So are those really the 2 items we're talking about, or is there more to it than that as well?
Well, I have kind of a separate piece to talk about, but for Dr. Noel,
And there's another one I have too.
Okay.
And we discussed this in some emails about how to word the agenda so it would be flexible enough for a discussion.
Mr. Herron, would you like to chime in at this point?
I don't, in my limited history, I don't see any relationship between the superintendent's report and the board's report at the end. I don't think they were meant to be one weight against the other. I think it's the superintendent's report and the board members' report, and it isn't a chance to give board members a chance to respond to the superintendent. And I think the Brown Act language is pretty close to what's under the superintendent. Is ask brief, make brief comments, ask questions, refer it to staff. And your point is well taken. If we all sit here asking the same questions and trying to come up with a solution, I think we have a big problem. And so I think we have to all recognize it's a very limited opportunity to question the superintendent.
Or report. Dr. Noel, what was the other?
Well, I just, apropos of that, of Mr. Aaron's comment, it seems to me that going back to Mr. Price's just his linkage of the superintendent report to this second sentence about the brief reports and so on, it just seems to me that the solution to this is that well, there are issues, how far separation between the one or the other, but that if it's right, there should not be an exchange of views over either the superintendent's report or the board member's report, because they are exceptions. If we're going to have an exchange of views, I'm paraphrasing you, it should be agendized, it should be, and then we have, as you say, can talk about it for at least 10 minutes, 5 minutes. To me, the easy solution is that if the superintendent is going to discuss substantive issues in his report, that they simply be noted. You know, in other words, then the superintendent's report would be an agenda item with the detail. Otherwise, it's a brief announcement, brief report on his or her activities. It just depends on how it really. That was the issue that came up before. Is how substantive is it? And 9 out of 10 of the superintendent's reports, I have no quarrel with whatsoever. That one time when I felt that I had a right to comment on it and was ruled out of order, I felt that raised the procedural issues that I'm now trying to get clarification on.
And Dr. Noel, you were ruled out of order strictly moving beyond brief was the issue. But for me, I guess my concern about starting to bullet certain things within the superintendent's report is that some things may come up at the last minute, and then the public may expect them to be bulleted out when they can't have been bulleted out, and so I'm reluctant to start that type of practice. Any other board member comment on that particular thing?
Okay.
Dr. Noel, you had one other thing you wanted to.
I have a related item. Another issue was, from my point of view, it's the issue of whether a board member has at least the same rights as a member of the public to comment. And that came up in the same over the same issue of the superintendent's report, because in fact we had at prior meetings recognized members of the public to comment, to speak on the superintendent's report. And if you question me, look at the minutes that we approved tonight on page 2 of 5, where superintendent's report, special education, gang outreach, public comments, Kate Smith. Now I don't expect, and you were new on the job, okay, and I don't expect everyone to remember everybody who ever spoke, but that issue had been discussed at a board meeting, and I think Mrs. Harder, I hope I'm not remembering incorrectly her comments, but I thought that the consensus was that, yeah, we had to let her speak. And then, in that occasion, then we would have the anomaly, in my book, that a board member could not speak to the superintendent's report while a member of the public could. And that was part of the same issue, but a different facet of it.
I do want to chime in that I was not board president for the minutes that we approved tonight. But Mrs. Cordero, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, to me it seems like, I mean, there's a larger discussion maybe that we're having, but the issue of whether a board member can do the same thing that a member of the public can do or ought to be able to, seems to me members of the public are not governed by the Brown Act. So members of the public, everyone in the room could ask Dr. Sarvis or one of us a question without violating the Brown Act, or have a discussion without violating the Brown Act. We have a different set of not only maybe rights, but also responsibilities that are governed by the Brown Act. And so if we engage with the superintendent, it's not the same. as when a member of the public engages with the superintendent. And if members of the public want to comment on what the superintendent has said, they're not risking any violation of, public law by doing that, and we are. So I think, well, it may be a little frustrating to know that a member of the public can do something that an elected official can't. I think it's part of the oath that we take, that we recognize that we have different responsibilities having been elected to this office.
And I don't know, Mr. Price, if there's anything you want to add to that.
Well, I do. In the case of every item that is agendized for discussion, and I'm leaving out the Pledge of Allegiance and items that are not intended for there to be a dialogue about, and possibly the superintendent's report. But for all regular items on the agenda, the only opportunity that the public has is through public comment, whereas the board has the right to and does engage in dialogue. So the public comment puts levels the playing field a little bit. The only time that I can conceive of the issue that you're raising, Dr. Noel, coming up would have to do, for example, with superintendent's report. And I think that many public agency lawyers would say that there is no right to have public comment because there's not any dialogue. It doesn't have anything to do with any agendized area. But whether there is a legal right for the public to comment on the superintendent's report or not, when you allow comments, like in the instance that you were talking about, then the question comes up, well, if we're going to allow those comments, do we also have to allow board comments to come up? Generally, there aren't comments on the superintendent's report. And practically speaking, here's why. Because since the items aren't described, as you've indicated, there really isn't anything to say before the superintendent gives the report, because there's no knowledge of what's going to be said. After the superintendent is given his report, there is not normally an opportunity for public comment, except insofar as the public has a right at every board meeting to comment on items that are not on the agenda. So they can bring it up at that time. The public has the right. And the board member, if they don't get up and do it at public comment, has the correlative right to bring it up under the section that's always on the agenda, board comments. So there may be an issue for you that has to do with timing. That's one thing. But in terms of not being able to have the same rights as somebody in the public, I don't see it exactly that way.
Let me,
Dr. Noel?
I want to address that in just 1 second, but it seems to me a very simple thing. Something we might do would be to put in on our agenda by the superintendent's report that there will be no public comments, or no public, neither public nor board comments, because that had been, and we do have the anomaly, and that had been. We had come to the conclusion that they had a right to it, but Mr. Price wasn't here.
Right. Well, that segues nicely into this document. The proposed return to regular session agenda section that I put with this. And I bring this up because with the previous board president, as there were more and more issues last fall, it is, and under the board bylaws, it's under the purview of the superintendent and the board president to set the agenda. And so they changed the order of some things to try to streamline the process, to try to make it clear when you do public comment on general topics. But I would like to, they did that without general board input. I would like to make some different changes here, but this time I want board input on it before I do it. And I looked at other agendas, and what I saw was that boards do things all different ways. And what I liked were ones where I saw that there was an opening of meeting with all those items, instead of getting separate agenda numbers that a member of the public might think, you know, I'm just going to go up and speak on A2 and want to talk about Spanish translation. Instead of putting that properly into the public comment section, I just felt like that would clarify things a little bit. And then I moved the announcement of closed session action. So the introduction, proclamations, presentations, and recognitions are all part of that, and then the superintendent's report. Then the announcement of closed session action, and then public comment, so that if there's something that has come up in the opening of the meeting or in the closed session action, that gives members of the public a chance to address that at that time. And then moving to the acceptance of donations, because that flows nicely into the consent agenda. But I don't know if the three of you have any thoughts or recommendations.
I just have probably the same comment I had about board briefs from the past, and I noticed on this agenda, it no longer has an agenda item number. It's just board briefs. So I appreciate that very much, because nobody can say it's on the agenda. It's just information. Under public comments, it says on topics not on the agenda. So the public would say, okay, if it's not on the agenda, I can talk about it, but isn't your C1 on the agenda?
Right, and so they could talk about it. It says here, for the new language, they did change the language under the public comment on this. And it says, during this time, the board president will acknowledge requests to speak on any matter under the jurisdiction of the board that is not on the action or conference agenda.
Yeah.
So that means this is where consent goes, and this is where, if you had any concern about the superintendent's report or the closed session action, this is where you could do it.
But wait a minute,
So I could talk
say that
on
again about
C1.
consent? Why is consent not on that list?
It's not on the action or conference agenda. Therefore, this is when you do talk about consent items,
Okay,
is
during
during
public
public comment.
Okay, gotcha,
Right.
gotcha.
And I have to say, I think it would be helpful, and this is sort of, as an aside, I think it would be helpful for us to have a welcome to a school board meeting that explains, like a poster or a brochure that explains this for people that are first-timers. And I would also be happy to change the language under superintendent's report so that it mimics the Brown Act language just a little bit more closely.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful.
Okay.
That would eliminate the ambiguity. In my little brief survey of the way agendas were organized, it was interesting, and maybe this will come up in our discussion of parliamentary rule, because I know at least in one version of Robert's rules, one of the first orders of business is approval of the agenda. And that seems to be a practice that is done at least as often as it's not done.
Right.
Whether we want to consider that or not, I don't know.
Okay, well, we can talk about, that's going to be an interesting morning.
I do have one other point.
Okay,
No,
Dr.
no, please go ahead, Mrs. Cordell.
Mrs.
I just
Cordell?
want to be sure that she remembers that I said one.
Okay.
Well, this is different from what the points that have been brought up, but I think it fits under the heading of the how we proceed. But one of the things that I think also would help with the issue of public comment is to remind, at the outset of the meeting, to remind the members of the public what the guidelines are. Because we adopted, for example, the practice that, or actually I should say we adopted the policy, we haven't entirely put it into practice, that speakers should identify their intentions or their desire to speak prior to the beginning of the agenda item. But we have continued to accept speaker slips as the agenda item is continuing, which often draws out the process. The other thing that we have not, I don't think we have really ever put it into practice, is that it says the total time allowed for public comment on any one item is 20 minutes. I really think we should adhere to that unless we actually vote or agree to extend that time.
Yes.
But beyond that, I think we really should limit it. And if we have, more than 6 speakers, or where it's going to the 3 minutes would extend over 20 minutes, then we limit the time. We make it 2 minutes or 1 minute, depending on how many people desire to speak. But I really think we should try to adhere to the 20 minutes. Now, obviously, there are some times when we have a really hot issue that it would be appropriate to extend that time. But I think at least that's something that I'd like us to discuss, actually imposing our policy.
Okay, Mr. Herron?
Yeah, we did that at a meeting, your first meeting, I believe. We had, we limited everybody 2 minutes because we had I forget what we had. We had 10 speakers, we gave them each 2 minutes.
And we have done that. What we have often not done is limit it to 20. We'll say, okay, maybe we can get it down to 30 minutes, but we haven't done that. Dr. Noel, you had another point to make.
Can I go with that other point now? Oh, okay. The other thing that evening that I found objectionable was when an item was pulled from the agenda. I find it objectionable, also commendable. All the people who had come here to speak to that item were allowed to speak, but I was not. I asked the California First Amendment Coalition for some views on these issues. They had an interesting answer to that. They said that the law, they can't find anything that one way or another in the law, but that if you're going to do it, get down on go to the floor and speak as a member of the public. I don't know whether we wanted, I'd ask Mr. Price's view of that, but I don't know whether we want to get into that. There is kind of an interesting, perhaps it's too nuanced, but if you pull an item from the agenda, then it's not on the agenda, then nobody can speak to it. And I don't know whether we can sort through those things or not, but it seems to me that if we're going to allow public comments on an item that we've pulled, that we ought to allow board comments on the item. Or, if the item's been pulled and is being postponed to another time, unfortunately, the public could be asked to come back at that time when there can be a comment, period.
Mr. Price, did you want to chime in briefly, or?
Only if anyone has a specific question.
Mrs. Cordero, do you have anything you want to add?
I wasn't sure you were looking for an answer, Dr. Noel.
Yeah, I mean, sure. If the public is going to be allowed to speak on an item that's been removed from the agenda, first of all, is that appropriate? Secondly, if they are, can a board member speak as a member of the public?
I'm assuming there was no motion that was made in connection with the item being pulled, correct?
Yes, there was.
That's correct.
Okay, well.
Just as we pulled one tonight.
If there is a motion that is seconded with regard to pulling an item from the agenda, then, as in the case of any other motion, then there can be dialogue by board members with regard to the propriety of the motion. So you would have had or would have that opportunity in such a case. On the other hand, if you have a situation where the board president has decided to pull something and for some reason it's done without a motion, then there is nothing that would be on the, technically, that's what I do, technically, there's nothing on the floor that would be the subject of any dialogue with the board. And so I don't know why there would be any more opportunity for public comment on that item than there would be, for example, on the superintendent's report. However, if somebody had comments or wanted to object to the fact that an item was pulled, especially under Mrs. Parker's new description of public comments, then they could say what they want to say under the auspices of C3. So one way or another, there's going to be an opportunity for a comment to be made, whether it's a board member doing it in connection with the motion.
Well, are you saying that we should really pull those with a motion?
No, I didn't say that. I asked
Well,
because I wasn't here that night, whether it was done that way or otherwise.
There are certain things, like, for example, the one that we pulled today with no motion is because the presenter is gone. Yeah. But the case that Dr. Noel is referring to, there was a motion because we knew that one board member did not want it pulled. So it was done in a more official way.
And in most routine matters, you're not going to want to require a motion, I wouldn't think, because that would raise a level of uncertainty as to whether it would actually go forward. You may require staff, consultants, et cetera, to have to be here to cover that eventuality, and I'm not sure you'd want to do that. That's why the board president, along with the superintendent, is given certain authority to control the agenda.
Okay, I want to point out now that it's after 10:30, so we know we're running over on this. But if there are any other last comments before we move?
I still didn't get a
Wait,
clear, a
Dr.
clear
Noel.
answer to my question.
Yeah, I'm afraid probably there's not a perfectly clear answer for you. But Mrs. Cordero, did you want to speak?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I believed at that meeting that what we had done was we had agreed, and there had been apparently a motion. I'd forgotten that we actually made the motion, but that we had actually agreed to pull the item. So this discussion wasn't going on while we were making that decision. We had already agreed to pull the item. And then what we did was we agreed that because there were members of the public here who had come specifically and stayed specifically to hear that item, that we really, as a gesture of courtesy to them, would allow them to make their comments so that they wouldn't have to return to the next meeting. Now, obviously, board members are going to be, or at least we assume, are going to be at all the meetings. We didn't need to extend necessarily that courtesy to a board member because the board member will be there at the next meeting when the item is taken up in order to make their comments. But more importantly, it was what we decided was that we would allow the public to speak. We didn't decide. It was sort of an exception. And we agreed as a body that we would allow the public to speak. We didn't agree as a body that we would allow the board.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to item G, which...
Just one thing.
Yes, Mr.
I think
Ryan.
a simple solution is just, on every item you're going to pull, just pass a motion. That opens up discussion on the motion. And, and so the board members could talk on the...
Well, I think whenever there is something...
It didn't really play out that way, but I can't reconstruct it right now.
We had, I believe, 2 items pulled, D3 and D8. Let's go to D3. Approval of staff travel, out-of-state travel, and our expenses in excess of $500, dated January 20th.
I pulled that. The last row, $985.48 of Title II funds. And I just have to ask, because I read the description of, oh, there you are. I read the description of what Title II funds are for in the consolidated application, and I wanted to see the relationship between the Spring Work Experience Education Conference and Title II funds. Well, is that an appropriate use of Title II funds?
It is an appropriate use of Title II funding. Title II funding is to improve teacher quality, and our work experience teachers are teachers in the district, so the conference would be to help them with skills related to general work experience, and in fact we're actually working at this point on looking at exploratory work experience, which would provide internships for students in the career technical education pathway. So it's related in 2 ways, one to the career technical education funds and then also to improving teacher quality.
And
this is a teacher?
Yes, Maureen is,
I
Marcine,
don't want to get
excuse me.
personal. I just want to know.
Oh, excuse me. Yes, the director
they
of
are
our
teachers.
of the
Okay,
Health
all right, thank you.
Academy.
Is there a motion?
That wasn't clear.
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
It passes unanimously. Then there was D8, the approval of the 0809 consolidated application for funding categorical aid programs Part 2 for the Santa Barbara Elementary and High School districts.
Mr. Smith, perhaps you can help me. I asked this, had this pulled. I'm concerned about the proportion of funds used to provide direct services to students as distinct from funds used otherwise. And there's some rules about that, and I want to make sure that we're in compliance.
Well, the compliance person is sitting right over there, so she'd be best equipped to answer your question. If she can get the microphone working.
I know, that's always a challenge for me. Yes, we are in compliance. The CONAP, the way it's set up, doesn't allow us to enter the numbers in any other way than is compliant with state and federal regulations. And so, yes, we are in compliance with the rules for Title I is probably what you're asking about, which
Yeah.
is the 8515.
That's
So,
right.
yes, we are.
Okay. And these, and the, I see here on page 3 of 26, it talks about reservations. That's the money that's held at the district office as distinct from distributed to the campuses. Is that correct?
Are you asking questions about CONAP Part 1 or CONAP
Well,
Part 2?
I've had concerns off and on about Title I money and about whether we're spending too much on administration and too little on students, and I'm not. That's not an accusation. I ask this every year.
Yes, I
Okay.
know you do. And every year we have pretty much the same answer. It's an 8515 rule with
Yeah.
Title I, and we can only use that amount of funding. Now, there is a little bit more flexibility with what the schools can use their funding for in terms of administration, because you can now use your funding to help look at data. So, for example, a teacher at one of our high schools could be pulled for a period, which would look like administration maybe from your perspective, to look at data to help the teachers inform their instruction using data. So there is a bit of a change in the CONAP, if you will, and in the federal rules. And that might be what your question, I know you've had that question in the past, and so, yes, that's actually specifically laid out in the instructions.
Well, I feel it's part of my job is to make sure that all the money that's intended for students gets to students, and that's what motivates my question yearly.
Yeah, thank you for that. We appreciate it.
And I could try. I got my calculator out, and I thought I figured 13%. I don't know what the real number was, because I'm not sure how to read these things. I mean,
Yeah,
this
the
is not
CONAP is a bit complex, and anytime you'd like to come by, Ms. Jate and I can go through that with you. The instructions are pretty complex with the CONAP, but the rule is 8515, and we adhere to that.
Well, I got 13, so that made you 2 percentage points within.
Which is
Okay.
great.
But I wasn't sure. That's why I had to ask. Thank you very much. I move to approve.
All in favor? Aye. It passes unanimously. All right, moving on to H, upcoming events, which we have already discussed. I, board comments and correspondence.
I have a board comment,
Dr. Noel.
and I'm glad Mr. Price is here. My board comment, no, it's by way also of a question within a comment. It is a question within a comment. We heard at the Brown Act meeting recently that the Brown Act basically doesn't apply to aspects of labor negotiations. And during the break, I asked Mr. Price about that, because it came as such amazing news to me. And I heard from Ms. Deacon that it was also put that way down in San Diego at the CSBA conference. Could you give us a, quote, brief report on that, Mr. Price?
It's not a report. When you mentioned that to me at the break, I tried to look it up on my little machine, and it failed me. But what I'm recalling, since you brought it up, is that what that section applies to is collective bargaining sessions, meaning sit-down sessions between a union and the management team. So if you have a couple of board members that have been appointed to the management team along with administrators, nobody has to worry about having to Brown Act notice those kind of things and having to daylight everything that's said in collective bargaining. That's what it means, and it gives the green light to to do what's always been done, and that's separate and distinct from what you may have been thinking about having to do with, or at least the way I took it when you asked me the question, having to do with going in and having closed sessions and having them be agendized and so on. That does have to be Brown Act compliant, as I know you understand that to mean.
Yeah, I do, and I thank you very much that because that comment at that meeting was kind of off the wall for me.
Any other board member comments?
I just have a really quick question. I don't know if this is the time to ask it. I want to ask about the board retreat.
As you
Do
can
you want me
see-
to get that, wait until we get to K, or?
I'm happy to mention it now. It's Friday, February 6th at 9:30 a.m.
I was just wondering how long
And we hope to be done by 12:30 at the
Okay.
latest. Mr. Herron?
I might as well end with this. I was just happy to see the Santa Barbara Youth Council students talking about taking on the graffiti issue in Santa Barbara. I was happy to see that 340 graduates from our elementary school graduated from the DARE program at the Arlington, and that the Cleveland sixth graders put on a tolerance, they're doing tolerance issues, studying Diary of Anne Frank. All three were very well publicized, and so I appreciate the good things in the paper.
Thank you. Future agenda items. Dr. Noel?
I would like to have the gang prevention as distinct from intervention matter put on the agenda to discuss the possibility of making a separate board-created committee for developing and implementing a gang prevention plan.
Okay. With that, we
Uh,
come, oh, Dr. Sarvis?
Well, I just wanted to make sure that we noted February 6th, Friday, February 6th at
Right.
9:30. And I saw a number of heads go up and down when the question was raised about changing the name of the high school district. So,
Well, I think that's something that would be interesting to have a community comment on, but I don't see that as anything that's a particular rush.
so you don't want to put that on a future agenda?
Not at this.
I don't
time.
want,
Okay.
Yeah.
It would help if Dr. Noel, on the topic you just talked about, would come with something in writing as to what your proposals might be. And the item you just talked about being on the agenda, it would help when the agenda comes out if there's some written comments as to what you're thinking, so we don't start from scratch. I'd like to see some key bullet points as what you'd like to see discussed for that topic.
All right. With that, we will adjourn. Thank you.